Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The show is about to commence. If you could make your way to the Green Theatre, we will be hearing from Manara Minerals on investing in critical minerals. My name is Aldo Panini. I am the Director of Strategy, Program and Content for the Future Minerals Forum. And it's my pleasure to welcome two very important gentlemen to the stage to have a conversation. To my left here, we have Farid Habib, who is the Director of Industrials and Mining Sector for the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, and Tamo Hansen, who is the Chief Investment Officer for Manara Minerals. Now, you would have been seeing and hearing a lot about Manara Minerals at this FMF, and since 2023, when Manara Minerals was created, they kind of set the scene for where the kingdom sees itself going as far as securing mineral supply through the announcement of taking a 10% stake in Vale Base Metals, which is still in process. So Manara has become, or is becoming, a major international force to enable the supply of new minerals, or strategic minerals, or critical minerals in what we call the super region of Africa, Western and Central Asia. So I'm going to start by asking Farid to tell us a little bit about the PIF strategy and how mining contributes to that overall objective.
Sure.
Over to you, Farid.
Thank you, Aldo. As you may have heard yesterday, I think the value of our endowment has increased, basically nearly doubled, so moved from $1.3 trillion to $2.5 trillion. This shows you how much potential there is in the mining sector in Saudi Arabia. And that's why the kingdom wants to increase the contribution of that sector in the overall GDP contribution, hence making this sector the third pillar of the industry, alongside oil and gas and petrochemicals. And the role of PF is really to enable the sector, and this will be done through our portfolio companies, so Ma'aden and Manara. PF was the initial investor in the sector. We helped grow and develop the mining sector in Saudi Arabia through Ma'aden. Ma'aden is today the fastest growing mining company, and it was able to develop and build value chains, the full value chain in phosphate and aluminium. And this is a testament of our ability really to build those value chains in the kingdom. In 2021, the strategy of Ma'aden was refreshed, and the objective is to grow the EBITDA by 10 times by 2040. And this will lead to an increase in the GDP to $23 billion and tripling the number of employees at Ma'aden. And also a key, the board has also provided clear direction to Ma'aden to focus on its ambitious plan in the kingdom, and not to do any international investments. Hence why PF took the initiative to establish Manara Minerals, whose objective is to invest internationally in mining assets. And the main reasons for doing that is Vision 2030 will lead to nearly doubling our needs in copper and iron ore. Although also the kingdom is blessed with valuable minerals, other minerals may not be available in the kingdom or uneconomical to exploit. And also we realize that there are opportunities out there that maybe the kingdom is best positioned to capture them. So hence why we thought there's a strong business case to establish Manara, which we announced in last year during FMF, and within a short period of time we managed to also announce a transaction. So it was quite an achievement, I would say.
And I should just highlight that it's these two gentlemen who have made Manara Minerals possible since its formal announcement. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on them because I think it's important to underline how significant the work that they're doing is, not just for the kingdom, but the broader region. And you just heard Farid deliver some very big numbers in terms of Ma'aden investment. This is potentially unparalleled in globally at the moment in terms of the amount of investment going into a company. So Tamo, I'd like to bring you into the conversation now and to tell us a little bit more about Manara and what it stands for.
Yeah, so Manara, unlike Ma'aden, and thank you Aldo, thank you Farid, normally M&A and mining investments happens more in the shadows. Today we're on the big stage, and I think that's part of the objective of this forum. And I think one of the reasons that Manara, as Farid said, was established is around being, supplementary, complementary piece to the overall critical mineral strategy of the kingdom. And so today, Ma'aden is the major established operator. Manara Minerals is an investment vehicle. So we are going to partner with established operators. We are long-term investors for many decades to come in critical minerals, and currently our focus is on 4 key commodities, but we're in the early stages in our journey and there's a lot more to come.
Can you tell us a bit more about those 4 commodities?
Well, so today we're focused on copper, nickel, lithium and high-grade iron ore. The first transaction we announced with Vale Base Metals, a 10% investment, is primarily focusing on nickel and copper. And going forward, ultimately the intent is to support the development of 3 key value chains in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and in the super region. That one is copper smelting and refining. The other one is the EV or battery minerals and battery metals manufacturing. And the third one is steel making or potentially green steel making and iron ore conversion. And those are the metals we're focusing on today.
Fantastic. So Farid, back to you in terms of how does the mining strategy of PIF fit into other sectors that PIF is focusing on?
Yeah, sure. So the metals and mining sector is one out of the 13 sectors that PIF cover, and actually it's one of the key drivers. Without those metals, you cannot build the value chains. Yeah. So in the very near term, the kingdom will be producing around 300,000 electric vehicles, and as you may know, these will need a lot of minerals to do that. Lithium and nickel, constitute more than 50% of the cost of a battery. So being able to secure those and feed it into the value chain will be an enabler to the downstream sectors. And on the renewable side, the ambition of the kingdom is to produce 50% of its electricity out of renewables, and 70% of that will come from PIF investments. As you may know, wind and solar will also require a lot of those minerals. I mean, on the wind side, the most important mineral there is iron ore, really. People don't realize that. And obviously the steel demand in the kingdom is expected to reach 30 million tons by 2035, and this will be an enabler to all our giga projects and then the oil and gas sector as well.
So no pressure then?
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess, Tamo, the emergence of Manara, what does it mean for the world? What's the big picture outlook here?
Well, I think, maybe for the world is a slightly ambitious statement, but I think
big.
Maybe. Yeah. But I think for now, what we can offer is, long-term patient capital for global mining investment. We're not focused, yes, the super region that we've heard a lot about today and yesterday is very important, is an area where we feel we can add a lot of benefit, but ultimately our mandate is global. So what Manara can offer with the support of PIF and stakeholders here in Saudi Arabia is genuine long-term capital, and that is not something that is particularly common this day in the mining industry. A lot of investments are short-term. Public markets are increasingly short-term. And to really develop long-term projects, that can take 10, 15 years. And I think that's the kind of vision that Saudi Arabia and the PIF can offer to the world in terms of providing a long-term capital to help them deliver their objectives in terms of local employment, beneficiation, extraction of resources, development of infrastructure, skills, and obviously with our partners on the operating side and our partners in government and communities, I think that's where we can add maybe something that's a little bit different to what the mining industry has seen over the last, well, quite a few years now.
And that's a really important point, because we've been hearing throughout FMF about this issue of short-term versus long-term investment. And there's been plenty of heated or slightly robust debate in the main plenary around how should the financial world be considering investing in the super region. And so maybe to you, Farid, what has been your experience so far since the creation of Manara? And on this issue of financing, how are you, just building on Tamo's points, how are you looking at the region?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously this has been a long journey. We've been working on this for the last 2 years, interacting with all the different stakeholders. And we realized that in the mining sector, there was a gap. There was a need for a player such as Manara to be able to enable certain projects that have been sitting there for a long time, because the industry has not been investing enough in the mining sector to bring in new supply. And also the same dynamics that Tarmo has mentioned, you know, being able to be a patient investor, I think is very important. And so we're filling a gap in that space, and we want to work with everyone really in that sector, including the Japanese trading houses, the majors, and even the other financial institutions too.
On that point, how are you in your engagements with some of these potential investors who, if I'm not mistaken, probably have a fairly conservative risk appetite? You look at the North Asians, for example. Have you seen a shift in that thinking? Is the conversation different now in terms of how they see risk coming into these jurisdictions? Who would like to have a go at that one?
Well, then I start. I think one of the benefits that Manara Minerals has is, of course, we can leverage a lot of the ecosystem that exists here in Saudi Arabia and some of the relationships and long-standing business, trading and cultural relationships that exist. I think we as one investor are trying to work with operating companies, how we can bring our experience to the table to overall, let's call it, make different jurisdictions more investable, more attractive, not just for us as investors, but maybe also for the more traditionally conservative investors in other parts of the world and with other mandates. And I think that's one of the areas where maybe we can act as a little bit of a catalyst. Not just Manara, not just PIF, but it's other PIF portfolio companies. I mean, before coming to Saudi, I had no idea. The world's largest water desalination company is from Saudi Arabia. One of the world's largest renewable power investors is from Saudi Arabia. So when we can look at supporting mining development for the benefit of ourselves and other investors, but also the communities, there are maybe different tools that we can bring that not everybody else can bring, that ultimately result in de-risking. Because what does de-risking really mean? What is a sustainable investment? It's usually one where everybody gets benefit. And that's why I think we can add something different.
No, I agree with Tarmo, and all this is new to us, right? Bringing, pulling the whole ecosystem together. Now we're talking to the Saudi Fund for Development to also be supportive in other projects outside the Islamic Development Bank, and the whole ecosystem so we can offer a comprehensive, attractive package to.
And a question for both of you. Infrastructure is a key theme, and the need for financing, but also a more comprehensive view of integrating infrastructure to other productive sectors. How does Manara look at that issue? Tarmo, do you want to have a first go and then maybe?
Yeah, well, I go first. I think it's ultimately, it is on a case-by-case basis, naturally. Infrastructure, mining is a very infrastructure-intensive industry, and I think it's fair to say that often it is that infrastructure that enables the mining project as well as maybe other economic benefits. And it's not always easy to justify kind of the investment quantum that can be required if you are just a mining investor or just a for-profit investor focusing on the mining industry. So I think what we're trying to do is maybe working with institutions, international institutions, Saudi institutions, to say, okay, can we make the infrastructure benefit the mining? Can the funding of the infrastructure be done in a way that is attractive to, it's called the mining investor, including us? And then maybe are there separate infrastructure investment elements that can be attractive to investors that are more focused on the infrastructure side? Ports, rails, and others. We don't necessarily want to invest in rail, but often that is required to enable, let's say, bulk infrastructure projects, bulk commodity projects.
Farid, anything you want to
No, I
add
think
to that? So that brings me back to this notion of risk and how the kingdom leverages its own relationships to overcome some of those, or minimize some of those risks. Farid, do you want to have a...
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways we've seen, is obviously making sure that we're partnering with the right operator who has established relationship in country and with the communities. This is a way where we can de-risk that angle. The other thing is to leverage the G2G relationships that the kingdom has with neighboring countries. So we're in regular contact with the various ministries in Saudi Arabia who are very proactive as well in that space, helping us manage those relationships to be able to de-risk our investments.
And another theme that is very strong here at FMF is the whole notion of responsible supply. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on how Manara considers that issue as you look outside of the kingdom and to the super region in particular with its own sustainability challenges and also opportunities.
Manara is on a journey there, but maybe I'll give you personal perspectives. Like when I took this role and was looking at this role, I think one of the things I looked at was, okay, what does PIF do? And does PIF have criteria around, CO2 abatement, responsible and sustainable development? And that is definitely a case. And one of the things I found very enjoyable since deciding to take that role is that it's not just policy statements that are, in an annual report, but it's a real live indications for investment objectives. So when we look at investments, there need to be real, tangible, ESG criteria. There's still work being done. We're ultimately still fairly early doors. But no, we want to align with PIF principles, and ultimately, of course, we want to work with partners that have these same principles in place, and I think that's also we can learn a lot from them. I mean, we are a young organization. We can learn from the experience that some of these operators have had for many decades in different jurisdictions. Mm-hmm.
And anything you'd add to that, Farid? In terms of responsibility and the new technology being an important part to that, is that a key area of conversation with your potential partners? How, technological solutions to some of these sustainability challenges?
Yeah, I mean, more specifically on the Ma'aden side, I mean, they're focusing a lot on new technologies, on how to accelerate exploration, how to accelerate, shortening the time to bring a mine into production. How can you use technology to improve safety and improve efficiencies as well?
So, what would be your key call to action, your key message coming out of this conversation for the people listening in and learning about Manara? One key message?
Well, I think from my perspective it is, we are a fairly young organization, but we have now made our first investment. We are building a team, we're building capabilities, we're building relationships. If you are a company, if you're a host government that believes they have an attractive long-term investment proposition, come talk to us here at FMF, here at various of the institutions in Saudi, through the PIF, and maybe through Manara's website if you like. We are very much open for business. We are looking to find and build long-term partnerships. So come talk to us, and maybe there's a solution that previously wasn't available to you that now could be a path forward.
Thank you, Taman. Farid?
Yeah, look, I mean, Saudi Arabia is a very young country, young population. People are very energetic. We actually walk the talk. We actually get things done. It's not just, Manara is an example. It took a year to set up. Then we simultaneously executed a transaction, and hopefully next year we'll have more deliverables.
Absolutely. So ladies and gentlemen, the message here you've heard, come and talk to us, is very clear one. You have a few more hours to do so, but I encourage you
talk to my team members instead.
I encourage you to reach out to Farid and Tamo. These are two very important gentlemen. I'll stress that point as far as the future of the kingdom's drive for more minerals to enable its own diversification, and as a huge supporter of FMF itself, which is in its early years. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Farid Habib and Tamo Hansen for their contributions today, and I encourage you to go and have a chat to them. So thank you very much. Now,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure to hand over to Edna Trianov for the next panel discussion. Thank you.
At what's going on. We'll get this set up in just a moment for you. This is the stage you're going to hear a lot about investment, a lot about outlooks, and really be able to take the time to see what's going on in the industry. We'll get another session started up here. But I think listening to what's happening at Manara, and one of the big takeaways I think I had there without a doubt was that idea of patient capital. This is a lovely phrase. I think that the investment money is there, that the capital is there, and actually they're probably a little bit more patient in terms of investors than many of our other colleagues. Let me please invite up to the stage Joe McMonigal. He is the Secretary General of the International Energy Forum. Paul Mitchell is going to join us, the Global Mining and Metals Lead for EY, and Ian Lang, the Associate Professor, Economics and Business at the Payne Institute, Colorado of Mines. So thank you all for joining us. Great to have you here. And we're going to be really looking at critical mineral outlooks. Now, Joe, you have some very, very interesting reports, and that I believe anybody can actually see as well. But, you know, when I was looking at some of the figures here, World Bank actually saying, when we look at the production of minerals, that the demand is, you have some numbers on this, it's growing huge. You know, a lot really needed to look and meet global targets. So from the IF, what's your outlook? What are you looking at?
Well, thanks, and it's great to be here. I noticed we lost half the crowd who want to meet Farid, so we'll try to keep their attention. For those of you who might not know, the IF is the International Energy Forum. We're actually based here in Riyadh in the diplomatic quarter across the street. We have 72 member countries who are members of the IF, so we're government energy ministries, mining ministries who are members. We traditionally focus on oil and gas and sort of the transition more generally, but I think as we've heard at the conference in the opening session and indeed at the ministerial meeting for those who were there, is that now mining and critical minerals is becoming is urgently needed to be considered with all these energy security and energy transition and meeting climate goals. So there's certainly a need for producer-consumer dialogue on critical minerals, but also between the energy and mining communities as well, because these issues are now increasingly intertwined, and so this is something we're doing. Last year we with the Payne Institute and the Colorado School of Mines produced a report that essentially looks at the various outlooks for critical minerals, both supply and demand, the publicly available ones at least, out to 2030, 2040 to meet the energy transition. The oil and gas sector has very, I think, more mature outlooks because we've been at it, I think, a longer time. But even within those mature outlooks in oil and gas, the difference between the lowest demand for oil and gas in 2050 and the highest demand in 2050 is about 100 million barrels a day, which is about the size of today's oil market. So if you're a company needs to make an investment decision, or you're a government policymaker needing to make roadmap decisions, that's a big a lot of indecision there in the various outlooks. Similarly is the case in critical mineral outlooks. And again, the outlooks are not as mature yet as in the oil and gas sector. So this is something that we're focusing on because we do it on the oil and gas side, and we'll continue to be working with the Payne Institute, I think, on this project.
And again, I mean, those outlooks on the oil and gas side are so valuable, and really they've grown. We'll talk a little bit more in terms of that producer-consumer focus, but they're so important now. And it makes great sense, I think, to just move these on to critical minerals. Paul, when we look at critical minerals and we look at mining and minerals and metals and that, come back to me and I suppose give me a little bit of what do you classify as critical minerals, and again, how does it differ in various parts of the world? What do we really need?
Yeah, look, I think, we generally think of what do we need for the energy transition and what does that look like. I think there's often a lot of confusion between critical materials, so what's made when we actually go through some additional processing, and what's a critical mineral. I think the things that policymakers need to remember is minerals is what we're going to run out of first. We actually need to focus for the initial part of the energy transition, certainly, on minerals and what we're going to miss out on and what's going to be short. Those shortages are then obviously exacerbated by geopolitical issues and supply chain issues, and so you do get differences between countries, but I think largely they get down to what's available and what's been put in place that we're able to extract. I think one of the ones that I think gets left out far too much is iron ore and metallurgical coal.
Okay.
I think we have a
basic but essential and critical, huh?
If you think about how we're going to make sure the energy transition happens, the first bit we need is the infrastructure. We need to generate power before we transmit it and before we store it. And iron ore, I think, we'll be okay on. The Pilbara will continue to produce. We're pretty hopeful that Simandou will get up and running and there'll be some diversity in terms of what's there. Vale's obviously got their act together and is working well. But metallurgical coal's under real risk. Most people, the public doesn't understand what it is. Capital markets don't understand what it is. They don't realise the difference. Hydrogen's not ready to produce steel yet in terms of what's there. And so I have this real concern that the mineral will run out of, and that will really hamper the energy transition, is metallurgical coal. As bad as that sounds to use the word coal when you talk about energy transition, it is going to be an issue as we move on.
Oh, okay, interesting. Because again, it's not what we hear discussed. And Ian, let's have a look at that from the U.S. perspective. Because again, different things in different countries. But what's the critical dilemma about what minerals are top of the list in terms of what's needed in the U.S.?
Right, and so the definition of critical becomes critical because if you have so many that are critical, then it's hard to say, well, you got every mineral called critical. They're all critical, right? Iron ore, coal, things like that. In the United States, the big talking point is copper. So the definition of criticality that's generally used is you have a very succinct supply from one country or two countries. And for copper, that's it's fairly ubiquitous, or it's fairly, produced in lots of places, so it never makes the criticality list, but the politicians really like to complain that it doesn't, because as Paul mentioned, almost everything is critical for where we would like to go. So it ends up being political football. It ends up being almost uninteresting, unuseful with his definitions of critical, given how wide it is and given kind of the political nature of some of these things.
Do you think we get carried away a bit maybe by looking at the rare earth and going down that avenue, and actually it is about coming back to basics, because without that we really can't progress?
Yeah, again, if it's critical, it means we need it in order to move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, so get our definition right before anything else. Don't be getting too excited. How about, we need the other stuff.
Right.
Joe, talk to me about this producer-consumer dialogue in the critical mineral space and how important, because I sometimes get the feeling that really hasn't been happening as much as it has in hydrocarbons.
Right, so just like in the oil and gas sector, you have certain producers and certain consumers, and the same is true in the mining and in the critical minerals sector alone. And so it's important because a lot of the large consuming countries are also a lot of the large consuming countries, maybe the exception of China, on the oil and gas side. So it's just really important, especially as we talk later about geopolitics, that we have, I think, a producer-consumer dialogue to maybe avoid putting more challenges in the way, like trade restrictions and things like that later down the road. So I just think it's really important. But as you're talking about the definition of critical minerals, it occurs to me that I want to maybe introduce maybe a new term for this conference and in this sector, and that's the question of whether we've hit peak critical minerals. In the oil and gas sector,
we're going to go into peak demand and peak
in
supply.
the oil and gas side,
Yeah.
this term peak oil was introduced several years ago. Of course, that disappeared with the shale revolution in the United States. But the reserves were found, but it was actually produced. I think in the minerals area, we certainly know that the minerals exist, and we think in the quantities that we need. The problem is the production, the mining, and the processing facilities. And we just have to speed up investment in this sector. We have to speed up the permitting parts of it. That's going to help. That's what's really needed to avoid this idea of peak minerals. And you mentioned the World Bank number. Some of the figures we had in our report with the Payne Institute is that the energy transition median demand projections, lithium in 2040 is 702 kilotons, or 13 times Australia's current annual production. And Australia is the biggest producer of lithium right now. Copper, which is the metal of electrification, which I think was mentioned earlier, we need the equivalent of 2 Chiles. Congo, we need the equivalent of 2.5 Congos to meet these energy transition demand needs. So these challenges are enormous, and as someone who attends a lot of energy conferences, not as many mining conferences, although I think that has to change, and a lot of energy transition conferences, including the recently held COP meeting. I think the challenge that's presented by the demand needs of critical minerals gets glossed over.
Yes.
And I don't think it's really understood as well as it needs to be. So that's why this conference is very important. Yeah. And I was saying to some colleagues today, maybe we need to have the FMF side by side with the next COP meeting so that people understand the needs of the mining sector and the benefits of the mining sector to the energy transition.
Oh, I think you're so right, and also how energy intensive it is. So therefore, to actually get that transition moving, we do have to have a little bit of a lag time, so to speak. Ian, when we look at demand, whether it be in terms of supply, what we've got at the moment, we need more clearly. So how important are new areas like what's happening here in Saudi Arabia? When we look at the potential that's here, and even those figures we heard, I think just yesterday, that the resources were valued about 1.3 trillion. They've been upgraded to 2.5 trillion worth of resources, and that's with only 30% of the country that's been explored. So there's so much to go here. And I suppose other countries, like what's happening in Indonesia, there's a big rush there. How important are these new sources of minerals?
Oh, they're critical. And I would say after events like the forum, and the Payne Institute also has a connection with KAICC, which is a little closer to the airport.
Yeah.
On your way out of town, you'll pass by their nice building. But there's a lot going on here. It's very exciting. It's going to really relieve a lot of pressure on development that would otherwise have to happen in places that may not really want it to be happening, right? Well, people have mentioned many times, I'm sure we'll get into it, permitting has been a big issue. But as people have said here, when the leadership gets involved, things start to happen, which isn't always happening in other places.
And I was actually talking to one of the deputy ministers too, who actually, just when they're looking at an awful lot of the resources here, he literally said they are in the middle of nowhere. So yes, they have stakeholders that they need to look after and that, but there are so many areas where, we're really looking at just vast desert land. So that actually helps them as well. Paul, let's talk a little bit about the permitting and the delays in permitting, and I suppose the challenges that this brings up. Without a doubt, the supply is needed. The green, no oil, people would probably like to see a lot more of electrification, and therefore we need a lot more minerals. But how do we actually get over the fact that there are hurdles, when it comes to permitting, and also, I suppose, threatening good projects and supply as well, ultimately?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think if you sit back and look at the industry and look at how we're going to get minerals to market and what we're going to do in terms of that, the brand of the industry is one of the major inhibitors of that, and something that we still have to work on significantly. And I think, as an industry, we need to work on that, and then we need to be in a stronger position to be able to lobby people to fix things like permitting, like the time that it takes to get a mine up.
What is the worst case scenario at the moment? Or what's the best?
The best is, it's interesting to say what's the best. The worst is, if you sort of look at Canada and Australia at the moment, to get a new resource developed is 10 to 12 years. Wow. In terms of what's there. And so if you think, we've got...
So you do need a lot of patience.
We've all signed up to targets for 2050. Unfortunately, if you measure best just on timeline, you end up with a bunch of other issues. So you end up with other ESG issues arising, other community issues arising, other brand issues arising. And I think, mining companies and others have to think about permitting as part of that portfolio of issues that they manage around all of ESG and around the way that they dominate. And I think, we've seen those functions move far closer to the CEO, far closer to the centre in terms of what the business is, and I think that's been a really positive move in terms of what's there. So that hopefully this rush to generate critical minerals won't create the issues that we've seen in the past. I've been to a couple of the new mines in some of the new regions. I won't name countries, but some of the ones that have been mentioned today, you compare a mining operation there from a health and safety perspective, from an environmental output perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and there are things that really concern me as a person that's passionate and interested in the mining industry. So you can imagine what your millennial sitting in Europe that's going to be your end consumer of this would think about it if they knew, actually, if our battery is going to come from nickel that comes from that place and is produced in that way, I don't want it. And I think we've got to keep that in mind when we think about how much we want to accelerate these processes. We want to accelerate the time frame, but we don't want to lose some of the good practices that have been built in there.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here. I think your point is very well taken. We in certain areas we have to do a lot better, and I take your point about concerning even you. But this idea that it takes 10 years to permit a mine. Yeah. What we need is, let's go back to the oil and gas example. Germany, gas supplies are cut off from Russia. Yeah. Germany is desperate to get LNG from the US, but they don't have import terminals. So what did they do? They basically expedited the permitting for these import terminals. It took 10 years to get the permitting and the public comment and everything for an import terminal. Germany just did it in 1 year. Yep. And I don't think anybody's thought that they cut corners in Germany, but we need to do the same thing, I think, in mining. If we're serious about expediting the energy transition, we need the same urgency about producing and investing to be able to expand mining capacity of critical minerals.
Absolutely.
Ian, when it comes to investment, where is the good money? Where's the interested money in the energy sector? Maybe you want to touch on this, Paul, as well. But are we in danger of losing investment because it's coming with such great green credentials? And how important is it that investment is kept there?
Yeah, I think obviously, as mentioned already, Canada, Australia are two high quality places to invest in new mining infrastructure, and it doesn't, from where I sit, at least in the US, I know there are some Canadians or Australians that complain it takes too long, and I always say the grass is greener on the other side, right? Check out what happens over here. Those seem like places where there is really strong investment, there's really, or where there's a lot happening, a lot being moved forward. I will say the part on the investment side that always really interests me is, obviously most of these critical minerals were minor metals. They're produced with something else. At the refining or processing stage, you need to pull them apart. So many places can do that. We have those assets available, but we're going to flood the market with this critical mineral as soon as we expand, some production technique. And so the thing you're trying to sell is all of a sudden going to crash in price. How do you get investment when you're about to crash a market? I think that's a good policy question to end on.
And looking at investment, even at the moment, Paul, we're looking at the price of copper. Maybe Joe, you'll come in on this too, because investment has to be attractive,
Yep.
And so further investment in this right now, and even with lithium as well, we've sort of stalled a little bit, have we?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think the previous presentation was really good in terms of talking about patient capital.
Yes, I like that term.
Absolutely. I think traditional capital markets have become quite left-wing when we sort of look at them. They're now dominated by pension funds. The way that they think about capital is quite different. But the way that capital is applied is still based on quarterly returns, and you've got to drive these measures that are just unrealistic for a mining project. And so I think we've seen more and more alternative sources of capital that have started to come into the market. Private equity has been one example, but sovereign capital is another. And whether that's sovereign capital in the way someone like PIF's able to do it, or it's incentive schemes like the IRA and pieces like that. I think of those things as a capital mechanism these days, rather than some alternative form of founding. And the one issue we've got with a lot of those government type incentive schemes is they're focused on the wrong part of the value chain. They're very much focused on materials and not on minerals. And so one of the things I constantly say to governments is you've got to get the minerals before you can produce materials. Never forget that.
Joe, I mean, again, we look at the hydrocarbon sector that's, desperately still needing investment just to keep sort of on par with what we need, to carry on and to get the energy transition underway. But is there a danger in terms of investment that there's not enough right now?
Yeah, look, I take the point that pricing will encourage investment, especially in key minerals. But at the same time, again, I just came back from the COP meeting in Dubai, and we're talking about accelerating. The key word is accelerating the transition. So I'm worried that we're going to be in a situation where demand is outstripping supply and raising the costs of electrification, and actually end up slowing the energy transition. And so, look, this is something that governments, certainly the private sector, but governments have to take seriously and figure out ways to incentivize investment in the sector, again, and in the roles that we talked about in terms of permitting and regulation, because that has an impact as well on investment.
Did you want to come back on that?
No, I fully agree with that. I think, capital is not going to go to a project that's going to take 12 years to approve. I mean, take Resolution Copper. 30 years to approve. I mean, capital is going to go where it knows it can get a return, and the people within the business can build a model, and they can have some certainty around it, and they can understand that they don't always have to take returns that hit a benchmark, but they have to have some predictability in terms of what they're doing. And these delays in permitting, these uncertainties around geopolitics, they really impact that ability to get certainty. And I think, mining companies will accept a lower return. They've started to invest in renewable energy projects, they've started to invest in reforestation. Those aren't 15% return projects, they're 5% return projects. So mining companies will do it if there's certainty. And so I think that's a big part of what we've got to encourage.
And of course, in this sector, Ian, if I can come to you, certainty is it's definitely not promised. A lot of the resources are in countries around the world that have some major geopolitical issues. And again, I think this is one of the areas that investors are going to be looking at. I mean, investors are certainly, they're not risk averse. They definitely want to look, and they've learned in the past sort of big risk is big reward sometimes.
Right.
But how carefully do we really have to look at the geopolitics? And where are we within this? I mean, some countries are managing fine, others not. So what to do.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly something you can't ignore. I mean, I will say most of the mining companies, it's not the first time they've ever had to go into politically difficult places, so they have ways to deal with that. Similarly, with prices going up and down, I mean, there's the super cycles were invented for mineral commodities. We kind of understand how to deal with the ups and downs of those kind of things. And one question I might have for Paul or other folk is, why aren't more hedging techniques in use when these prices come up and down? But, the mineral geopolitics are going to play out. We're going to have scenarios where, I guess more recently, right, the US allowed UK and Australia to be part of the Defense Production Act as a way to strengthen investment in those places. And so there'll always be the friend-shoring friendly places I think that people will want to be at, and then they'll move on to the less and less friendly places.
Paul, I mean, again, let's have a look at the geopolitics and the damage that it can actually sometimes, cause even within country and nationalization of resources. That's still a real risk out there in some areas.
Sure, absolutely it's a risk, and you shouldn't downplay that. I think, though, sometimes we get overly concerned about what some of the regulations are, and they do get overplayed. So, I mean, there's been a lot of criticism about the new system that's in place in Chile. But in reality, the system in Chile, it caps royalties and tax at 48%. Every miner in Canada and Australia would love to be paying 48%.
Right.
And it says you've got to use a local development partner to access our resources. It doesn't limit what you can do.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. So the worst example of geopolitics has been the state of Queensland in Australia. That's going to absolutely destroy metallurgical coal, and when we find it there, because it will exist because of all the bauxite, all the rare earths that are there are going to suffer the same thing. So I think, yes, it's a huge issue, but I think don't get carried away that things are really bad and stop you being able to produce. Good producers can cope with a tax rate of 48% and a local partner. I don't think that should put anyone off.
Joe, again, in all of your Outlook reports, this is something you'll look at seriously. Where do you think are the key issues and the risks when it comes to geopolitics?
Well, again, as I said earlier, I think that the trend now in geopolitical risk in this space is on trade barriers and export restrictions. And again, this is why we need more producer-consumer dialogue to really talk about these issues. It's already a very challenging space, as we've talked about here and in other sessions, to add other obstacles or challenges. It just makes, accomplishing the energy transition goals more difficult. The OECD recently came out with a report that said export restrictions on critical minerals increased fivefold over the last 10 years. So it's a serious problem. We have to address it. And again, I go to a lot of conferences and ministerial meetings, and I have to say this does not really get discussed.
And again, so something that I think some people sort of shy away from it sometimes. And, even I had a panel today with a Chinese producer on, and I was not going to be able to draw him in on the anything vaguely political about China and about energy security in China, so that we have a resistance in terms of not wanting to talk about it. But when we look at supply, Ian, if we can just look, is there any other way to meet supply? Are there alternatives out there? Is the demand is so big right now. There would be some people that say we should not be, looking for resources. We should not be exploiting mining resources, that there must be the vegan option, so to speak.
Well, as, I guess card-carrying academic economist, right? The necessity is the mother of invention. My favorite story from my time at the Critical Materials Institute at School of Mines is that when the rare earth prices went up in 2011, all of the motor manufacturers were like, well, right now our motors are 7%, 6% rare earths. But actually we looked into it and we could probably get by with 0.5% rare earths and it still work. And of course they had no reason to think about that when they were cheap and everywhere. And so I kind of believe that yes, we will need minerals, but where there are pinch points, people will try to make a better mousetrap. Whether this be moving from the NMCA batteries to sodium batteries, or just some other, taking one mineral out that's more dear and putting in one that's more plentiful.
But it still comes down to mineral mining metals. That's what we still really need.
I mean, obviously, yeah, we can't get rid of them all. Like they play a role, but they can play a much smaller role if we have innovation towards those ends because the prices require that. Now, maybe everything becomes through things like this or through things like Ma'aden. We don't ever have to get there because the prices of minerals are so low with so much availability, or places around the world trying to step in to fill that void. But I also think it's not as dire. The other thing, my other favorite thing is one of the places there's rare earths in an automobile is in your motor that rolls up your window. So if we had a rare earth restriction, you might have to go like that again. Like, wouldn't that be
we
awful?
remember that.
Wouldn't that be awful if we all had to do that again? But anyways, yeah.
We're going to have to start wrapping this up, but talk to me. Actually, maybe I'll stay with you, Ian, to start our little wrap up and just come down. Again, what needs to be done now? We're looking at the outlook, and outlook's changed without a doubt. But what's the best case scenario out there in terms of what does this industry really need to do to move forward?
Well, I see a lot of the issues with permitting. What I think about is taking advantage of every asset we currently have as much as we can. So any sort of refining processing facility that's not separating out the minor metals or the critical minerals, that investment's cheap, the asset's already there, it's operating, it's essentially zero cost. Just do it. Like, I don't know what's getting in the way, what governments have to do to subsidize that to make that happen.
Paul, looking ahead, where the big quick win-wins, because we have to get this right somehow.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think we need to keep an eye and focus on continuing innovation. I think we've gotten better than we were. We fell into a real hole for sort of 30, 40 years in terms of innovation. I think we do need to continue investing in that. I think the big thing mining companies have to do is make sure we don't do anything that damages the brand of mining anymore. We need to talk it up. We need to make sure that people realise our way of life would not exist without mining, and the way of life we envision would not exist without mining. And the more we can get that message across and the more we can do to make sure we don't stuff that up, the better.
But the industry is not very good at doing that, is it?
No, the industry is not good at doing that jointly. There's some individuals that are good at doing it on their own, but collaboration has never been something we've been good at in industry, and we definitely need to learn how to do that and get our message across in a consistent and a more vocal manner.
And Joe, the power of communication and getting that message, out there. And whether we like it or not, I feel, having come from a media background, we look at the media at the moment, and it's hard to get them to do a good story. It just seems like it's if it's got to be anything to do with resources, it's a push to get a positive story out there right now. But looking to the near term, when you're back now with your team looking at outlooks, what's going to be top priority for you?
Well, just to build on what Paul said, I think collaboration in the industry is really important. But I go back to this. What I think is urgently needed is this producer-consumer dialogue. Yeah. To really, because if we don't do it, we're going to be looking at a slower energy transition. We're going to be looking at trade barriers and restrictions, and that's not going to help us meet our climate goals. It won't help, the critical minerals mining sector and the energy transition in general. So I think that's a very easy first step because a lot of that's not going. I think we could try to shut out the PR side of it because I don't think it's as urgently needed as getting the policymakers and the players, industry players, on the same page.
Yeah, no, you're so right. And for a long time that didn't exist in the hydrocarbon sector. Hence the creation of the International Energy Forum. But that dialogue was not there. It was, sort of two opposite sides, and sadly that's beginning to happen, I think, a little bit in the mineral sector too. So we have to be careful. But all good thoughts, and, thank you for sharing your great ideas and experience and, your outlook on the outlook. So, gentlemen, thank you much. Ian, Paul, and to Joe, thank you so much. Thank you, dear audience, for being with us and staying with us for this. And I'm going to hand over now to our next session. Thanks again.
Should we get a group photo?
to start? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in this hot afternoon, post-lunch time slot. Joining the panel, one of the most exciting panels of this afternoon, charting the GCC's development into a world-class processing and manufacturing center. I am Igor Hulák, partner at Kearney, global management consulting firm, and the strategic insight partner of Future Mineral Forum. Today we gathered a panel of 4 very seasoned professionals, and let me introduce them to you. First, let me welcome Philip Lindop, Global Head of Mining at Barclays Investment Bank, with more than 20 years of investment banking experience, so money is represented. Let me also introduce Mark Ashwin, Principal Vice President and Metals and Mining General Manager for Europe, Africa and Middle East at Bechtel. Also, I would like to welcome the home resident, Engineer Mahmoud Al-Asmari, Director of Minerals and Metals at National Industrial Development Center, where he has been running his agenda for the past 14 years. And last but not least, also let me welcome Scott Taylor, founding partner of Taylor David Lawyers, with experience and expertise in private equity, M&A, international mining and resources, and debt restructuring. We are gathering in Riyadh today, which is in the heart of a very, very vibrant and dynamic GCC region. And I believe you would all agree with me that this conference has been yet another statement or evidence of that fact. The GCC countries, each of them have defined and is very busy implementing their enormous industrialization strategies to diversify from the dependency on oil. Let me play a little bit with you. Just close your eyes and transpose yourself into very near future. When you go to buy your new car, very likely, and being involved in some of these projects very intimately, nearly certainly one of the brands in the showroom will be manufactured here in the KSA. And it will be, very likely, electric battery vehicle. And the battery that will replace the engine in that car will be also manufactured here. The battery will be getting a power from the renewables energy that will be coming from the solar panels or the wind towers, very likely manufactured in the KSA as well. And as you drive, your navigation system will be talking to you, getting a signal from the commercial satellite manufactured in the outskirts of Riyadh. All of that is great to imagine, but all of that will, as we know, require a lot of minerals, and green minerals. Green is in demand, green is in fashion in all seasons. But all of us know that all of these projects are capital heavy, intensive, and long term. I haven't been able to join every panel in this conference, but those that I joined, each of them mentioned one word: capital. And we have who better than Philip with us. Philip, can you open up and tell us what is the opinion of the capital? What is the appetite of the capital to fund all of these projects?
Well, thank you very much, Igor. And if I could just echo your thanks to our hosts and the inspiring experience it has been for me anyway to actualize this incredible vision, the Vision 2030. But there's much more, as you have very articulately posited. There's much more to it than that. Look, I think as it relates to the capital opportunity, if I'm frank, in the mining space, in this cycle, that is probably the single biggest limiting factor for the development, for the market to be able to respond to the signals such as this that are being sent in terms of future demand. It's the access to capital. The public equity markets have very limited interest in the space. The public debt markets have always been variously interested, and the banks are under enormous pressure to comply with a range of complex and challenging requirements. So I think it's an obvious starting point, but the Kingdom brings to the equation, as we heard from the Honourable Minister of Finance yesterday, very long-term, very patient capital. And that is an enormous competitive advantage, which, based on the technical and complex planning that I've certainly seen and experienced this week, is not going to be squandered. So I would say that is, if you like, the relevant starting point. As it relates to capital being applied to projects, there is a long history in the mining space of capital being misallocated. And I think, again, the precision around which projects are going to be developed and for which purpose is incredibly important. What was inspiring to me about the earlier panel with the Manara Minerals team is they are very clear what metal they need and which year for which purpose. And again, I think that capital discipline, that the allocation of that capital with discipline is going to ensure that only the best projects get built. So, I think there was a comment on an earlier panel that the market is not responding to the demand that is being signaled. A statistic quoted a few times this week is more copper is needed between now and 2050 than has been mined in the last 120 years, by a multiple. And there is a similar statistic in iron ore and certainly in lithium and so on. And I suppose the challenge then is how to use this very valuable resource, which is ultimately the demand for the metal that is being created in this economy and in this super region, having just understood the scale of the super region. That creation of demand, I think, in of itself will de-risk and mobilize capital to ensure that the best projects are built in the requisite time frame.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. I will come back to you with that appetite, because very recently, as we know, the capital has also appetite for ESG. But let's park that and let's come back to that. Mark, in your role, you have a great opportunity to see across 3 continents: Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And the GCC countries obviously are part of your responsibility. GCC countries, I think it's fair to say, have not been seen as the traditional industrial investment destination. But the world is changing. Each country of GCC, including Saudi Arabia, are steadily climbing on all the top charts of the FDI year by year. How do you see it? What brings you and your company to GCC? Why do you see GCC as an interesting destination for investment?
Yeah, Igor, thank you for that, and appreciate it. And I think we talk to lots of customers across the globe. So we have a global mining business. I focus on Europe, Africa, Middle East. But it's about choices, and I think our customers have choices to make about where they want to take their projects, invest their money. And I think that GCC has got lots of advantages, and I think as they weigh the positives and negatives up, then I think you'll begin to see that centre of gravity shifting from more traditional markets where there's a lot of commodity in the ground. So if you look at Australia or Africa, they're endowed with fantastic resource bodies. And so that drew mining activity to those because it was starting at the hub. But they all have their challenges. And so I think as you see the GCC, it's got really accessible power. So I think it's at a great price. And so that helps if you've got a power-intensive industry, then you gravitate to that. I think also we're seeing that there's a segment of renewable power in that as well, because a lot of our customers need to be sustainable, they need sustainable products, and so that renewable power, so the UAE is 40% renewable power right now, and so that's a big pull. And so there's that power availability. Then I think there's the policy and security, so the government policy. So I think the Middle East government policies is helping attract people in. They're very business friendly. And I think that, when you compare to some of the issues that are going on around the world, I know Middle East has always had its challenge with security, but I think it's becoming one of the more comfortable places for people to be. And so I think that's a great thing too. So you've got that security side. And then I think you've got the ESG impact. So we tend to call it the social license to operate. So, a mining company or a manufacturing company has got to have the hearts and minds of the people around it, the country, to actually people to support and embrace you bringing a project to their country. And there are some resistance. In Australia and America, there's some fantastic opportunities, but the local pressures are stopping those projects from going ahead. And I think you'll find the GCC, as it's a developing nation, there's an eager appetite to support projects. So I think that's going to help with the growth of projects. And then you've got the final piece, which is what we've heard a bit about, is the growing mineral resource body in Saudi Arabia, being that draw to bring in industry in. It's gone up 30% from the last time it was checked a year ago. So that's a fantastic growth. If you listen to Bob Wilt, it's going to grow even faster as they do more exploration. So I think that resource body being here will be that center of gravity to pull in things together. So I think those things combined will help with the factors. And I think that the final thing then is it's okay being an extractor of minerals and a processing of that mineral into some product. But I think the real value chain comes in the next step, which is the manufacturing process. So you go from semi-manufactured products to fully manufactured products, and that value chain, because you get the higher value. We're beginning to see that in Saudi Arabia. We see it in the UAE. They go from bauxite mine to alumina refinery to aluminium smelter to rolling plant to car manufacturing to aeroplane manufacturing. And I think that value chain is coming, and that's key to making it very attractive. Africa, unfortunately, a lot of the mineral resources are mined and exported and manufactured elsewhere. So I think that's why the GCC is going to be in a great place.
Thank you. Allow me to zoom into the KSA now. We are sitting in Riyadh, in the heart of GCC, and probably the most dynamic place to be in, not only in the GCC, but probably worldwide. And as I said in my opening remarks, when you sit here, it feels like being in the capital of the future mineral and mining of the planet Earth. We have Mahmoud joining us, and Mahmoud, I know how much you have been involved in the industrialization of the country and in the industrialization plans, and you are at the beginning, you are upstream, I know how much under positive pressure you are to ensure that there are the minerals needed for the industrialization. So how do you see it? Where do you see the enormous potential for KSA and for the investors coming and actually making it the center of the processing in the GCC?
Thank you, Igor, for having us today. I think it's my pleasure to be here with the panelists. Of course, for focusing on Saudi Arabia, I think I will give insights on the demand-related opportunities, in addition to the challenges that we would like to face and avoid. So, from that aspect, we have in Saudi many aspirations, and we are targeting the opportunities from many dimensions. One of them related to the more of the demand-related products of the construction and infrastructure, in addition to the industrialization revolution that we are working on today in Saudi with the targets that we have. Some examples of that related to the steel, aluminium, and other value chains that we already have and we are expanding today. Additionally, I think we have another dimension related to the supply push that we have in Saudi today from the abundant resources that we have in Saudi that for need for the export market. Of course, one of the examples related to the phosphate value chains that we have, and we are exporting for the food security for the global market. Additionally, I think we are planning today to be positioning as a recognized player globally on the critical and strategic targets on the mineral processing as a mineral hub in the super region that called yesterday by His Royal Highness. I think I will insight on some examples related to the targets, in addition to the opportunities related on new ones and the expandable ones. One of them related to Saudi Aramco, which is the largest global oil manufacturer, and we are today targeting to have more than 50% of its demand products to be localized. This will generate a lot of opportunities related to the expanding on our capabilities, in addition to the new products in the market on the metallic and non-metallic product that we are looking for. Additionally, I think we are having a lot of construction and infrastructure, of course, in the region here. In the country, we have Gidea, Neom, Red Sea, a lot of announcement that we have in 2023, which is related to Expo 2030, World Cup 2034, and Murabba and other related BIF projects. That will open window for a lot of opportunities for the building materials and new building technologies that we are looking for localized in Saudi Arabia. Some of them exist and will be expanded, and some of them we would like to have in country as soon that available. Some example of that, of course, related to the steel, rebar, extrusion of aluminium, in addition to the ceramics and dimensions tools that we are developing in the country, and we are integrating with the region here. Also for the energy transition, country today are planning and targeting to develop renewable related projects to have more than 50% of power generation in Saudi to be from the renewable related products. This, of course, will open window for the silicon metal value chain from quartz till the polysilicon and panel solar. So this is, I think, excellent opportunity also for the copper value chains that we have some announcement today about the copper smelter, and I think we are able to make a lot of resources available for that cathode material in Kingdom. Additionally, I think just to add with the EVs related, which is we are developing today, I think we are in planning for 500, and I think maybe it will be doubled of the car of numbers. The number of the car manufactured will be in Saudi. Of course, this will be related to the critical minerals that will be in need for the region, and we will be able to be the processing hub for that type of minerals, critical and strategic ones, such as the lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese, and graphite. So those are opportunities. Of course, there will be challenges, but I think with the capabilities that we have and success that we made previously on the processing that we have, we will be able to enable it and have it here in the region and the country.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Scott, to round up the first cycle of the questions, I think you are the shining example of who actually tried that attractiveness of the region and attractiveness of the KSA with your project that you developed. And again, I open up with some imagination how the electric vehicles actually are already manufactured here and will be manufactured here and will have the battery also manufactured here. You are very centric to the lithium projects here, and you had a very recent experience of actually developing the joint venture here in Saudi Arabia. How it feels from the recent experience for you as an investor, as someone who represents the investors, to make the project that is very centric to the green metals, to the processing here in the region?
No, thank you, Igor. So there are two Australian companies, EV Metals Group and European Lithium Group, who have entered into agreements to build the Middle East's first hydroxide plants, lithium hydroxide plants. So between Australia and Saudi, these are two of the most commercially significant agreements entered into. So I've personally worked on the joint venture between the Oberkan Investment Group and European Lithium since its inception. The MOU for that joint venture was actually signed at this very conference 12 months ago, and it went binding in June of last year. So for this project, European Lithium, which is an Australian listed entity, it owns a lithium mine in Wolfsburg in Austria. The spodumene from that mine will be transported down to Saudi Arabia under an exclusive offtake, and from there the JV has the ability to service the GCC region and beyond with lithium hydroxide supply. There is also an existing offtake agreement with BMW for the hydroxide produced. So operations for that particular plant are intended to commence in 2026. And whilst I understand that may seem somewhat ambitious, it does integrate perfectly with the ability to supply hydroxide to the developing EV industry within the GCC. So beyond those projects, I'm actually joined here in Riyadh by a number of other Australian companies who have developed various technology, whether it be in hydrogen or iron ore, low carbon, more efficient technologies, but they all want to develop in the kingdom. They all want to progress in the kingdom. And I suppose what I'd like to go through is what the attraction is for these companies and why they're choosing Saudi Arabia. So beyond having incredibly welcoming and friendly people, the lower energy cost is of significant importance. I mean, it significantly reduces the operational expense, and in some cases, it's a tenth of the cost of what it is in other parts of the world. There is a very stable, sovereign and political environment. Saudi is no one's enemy, everyone's friend. So this significantly de-risks the potential geopolitical issues and potential trade wars. The availability of government financial support to develop and the general access to private capital, it's something that's simply not as easily accessible in most other parts of the world. This region is also quite well geographically centrally positioned. I mean, it's a perfect hub in particular for supply from mineral-rich Asia-Pacific to downstream supply for the Middle East and Europe. Upstream potential of an ambitious local mineral exploration also provides a very positive outlook on future resource availability. And many companies simply wish to just be a part of the opportunity transforming the kingdom as it works and strives towards this Vision 2030. So the kingdom's in a very unique position where it's got a blank canvas ultimately to develop supply chains. It's not wedded to any traditional processing models that other more established countries have adopted. And it's got the ability to incorporate the latest technology, utilising the most efficient methods from the ground up, effectively redefining the global industry. The GCC countries should also learn from mistakes of other countries. So Australia, for example, is the largest exporter of iron ore in the world. Our economy is largely dependent upon it. Most of this iron ore is sent to China for processing. Then Australia buys its steel back from China. So there's a kink in the chain there. And due to life of mine offtakes, life of mine commitments for offtakes with China, it's too late in many regards to remedy a number of these issues. So collaboration amongst GCC countries to pool resources and skills to strengthen its developing supply chains will overcome the issues that we've seen elsewhere. So it does really, if that can be effected, it will provide the ability for end-to-end value. In terms of the practical challenges associated with developing these supply chain hubs, it's effectively the skills shortage and the skills experience that's lacking within this region. But these, in my view, are challenges that Saudi is and will continue to overcome by its willingness to attract and partner with foreign investment.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a great example of how to turn to talk, to walk, or to action your project. And some of these challenges that you had encountered, maybe Mahmoud, would you like to share any views how you are seeing them from the other side, of from the government point of view, or those who are attracting the investors, and what recipes you are offering to address them?
Thank you, Igor. I think this is will be one of the achievement that we will have soon in Saudi, because I think we are working with the companies closely on enabling that type of businesses related to the critical minerals that global is need for. So we are working with many of those in parallel companies to have the right achievement for the need of global today on the critical related and strategic ones. Lithium is a good example, and I think we are planning to have the nickel and cobalt and manganese also in ground, because I think we have excellent capabilities and infrastructure that will give the the goal for the companies to be in the ground as soon as possible, to have them integrated and have the mineral processing hubs here in the country to serve the super region and the global market with that type of products with the right competitive prices.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. Allow me to fast reverse to the beginning and go back to where we started, and to one of the most important things, which is money, capital. And this panel is about the processing of green metals. And as I said, green is in demand, green is in fashion in all seasons. The money is also interested more and more about green aspects of the projects, about the social and environmental aspects of the projects. So how, maybe Philip, if you can tell us the view from the banker side on the ESG. It's impossible to talk about developing the processing and manufacturing hub without taking into account ESG.
Thank you. Evidently, this material is required to decarbonize the energy system. Evidently, this material has to be extracted and processed in order to achieve that. But I think the challenge that many public mining companies face is the perception of the industry is not very good. Now that there's, let's say, more purpose to the ultimate utility of their product, I think there is an enormous burden on the entire mining industry to tell that story, and to tell that story in a positive and a confident way. I think there's a lot of focus on carbon in all these discussions, but actually in mining, the social and some of the other related environmental issues, in some cases, are much more important. And sadly, in the last few weeks, we've seen in other parts of the world communities completely rejecting the mining industry, which to many of us in a booming economy like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia would find difficult to reconcile. And so, what I've heard this week is, as this nation brings a clean sheet of paper to in a sense, a new industry, not that it's a new industry, of course, in Saudi Arabia, but is the idea that there is going to be a balanced partnership and that the values and the principles of the kingdom are going to be applied to the choice of the partner and how collectively that work gets done. And I think that's, to my mind, the very simple answer here. If there's an extractive or an unbalanced relationship between partners, between local communities and an operation, between countries, well, those of course are not sustainable. And I think in mining in particular, that is the axis of sustainability. As broader focus moves from carbon to nature, we're certainly seeing a lot of interest in terms of disclosure and in terms of regulations coming to nature alongside the work that's been done on carbon. But again, I think in the normal course, responsible operators will treat their footprint carefully, and I'm sure that ultimately when these products that we've been talking about, that you've been visualizing for us, are sold to consumers, consumers will want to know that there's integrity to the material that is contained in the product that they're buying. So in the end, I think there's balance, there's equilibrium, there's a natural alignment of interests, and it's important to get these things right from the very start.
Thank you. Thank you. Any addition from your real project, how you dealt with ESG aspects of...
ESG is obviously very important for anything. If we're to look at the upstream, midstream and downstream, end users want to know that ESG, it's important for end consumers these days. So it's certainly something that is being implemented and is of very high importance to these projects that we're undertaking.
Yep. Very good. Let me also, because the title of this panel is GCC, yeah? And we touched upon the enormously ambitious industrialization plans of each GCC country. We are talking in this conference about the super region. The GCC is a mini super region of the super region. Maybe Mark, from your position, how do you see, do the countries within the GCC really collaborate? Or is there yet to be something done in that aspect?
I think we're seeing a definite improvement. So we're working on a project in Bahrain, and gas supply is one of the critical things that's going to potentially impact that project. And then there looks like now there's a causeway that's going to link Bahrain to Qatar. And if you get a causeway, there's no reason why you can't have a gas pipeline. So all of a sudden that interrelationship, and I know the Qatar-Bahraini relationships goes back to 1560 or something in terms of the challenges it's faced. So it's a long history, but we're beginning to see some of those things change. And so I think it's been, I think the last 5-year transformation in Saudi, being that facilitator of collaboration within the GCC region has helped enormously. And so I think that we're going to see that change. So I think, between Oman's, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi, Qatar, I think you're going to see that cementation of cooperation, and I think that will then lead to much better prospects and projects. So,
okay. Any addition, Mahmoud?
Yeah, thank you. I think what is the super region related? I think for GCC countries we have a good success stories. I think such as the aluminium mentioned here about the capabilities that we built in the region. I think we are about 8 to 9% today of the global supply of the aluminium. So also I think we have excellent capabilities on the phosphate. I think we are integrating and supplying about 8 to 10% of the phosphate related to the global market. So this success stories I think will help on having this nation integrated and having them work together on achieving what is the global's need.
Thank you. I'm getting signal that we have last 2 or 3 minutes. So I started with playing a little bit of imagination. So let's finish off the panel with the same. So if you had a magic wand that can turn talk into action, what would you use it for? Can we start with you, Philip?
With pleasure. I'm going to quote Amos Hochstein from yesterday's speech, the advisor to President Biden, which is, let's believe in the ingenuity and the creativity of human beings. And there is no better or greater example than I can think of than what has already been achieved under Vision 2030. And I'm sure there'll be many technological innovations that come with that.
Mark?
I think it's that no one country puts its own goals above the collaboration. And I think that's what's going to make the hub and the region go a lot further. I know that's it's almost like world peace, but just in a bit smaller.
Okay. Mahmoud?
Yeah, just to, I think, add of the integration related, we may have integrate on the related, advantages that they have. Every nation that have its advantage that can be captured with the other ones. I think we have the excellent capital here in the country and infrastructure for the economic zones and industrial cities. And we can integrate, I think, on that with the resources and with the final products and having the right technologies that I think give the ESG targets implemented.
Thank you. Scott?
Collaboration is key. The GCC countries will always be stronger together. And beyond that, I suppose just embracing the ambition of the region, I think is incredibly important.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us, joining this exciting discussion and panel. I think if I can summarize, money matters still and probably will. The way how the money is spent is more and more important. We also heard that collaboration is in the center. I think the sentiment is changing. The paradigm, the legacy paradigm that the GCC is not the first choice of the destination for the investment for the industry is gradually changing, and the investors are coming. And Scott just is a shining example of one of the latest examples in the green metals. Thank you very much. Thank you all to our panelists. Hopefully you enjoyed this insightful discussion, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
G'day, folks. My name's Peter Arkell. I don't know whether you can tell from my accent, but I'm from China. I'm the chairman of GMAC, which is the Global Mining Association of China, and I'm very happy to be hosting this session, which is the Super Region Spotlight powering the growth of mineral supply chain infrastructure. We've got a fabulous panel. We haven't got much time to explore a pretty big topic, so bear with us. We'll do our best, and thank you very much for your interest. So I think what we'll do, fellas, to get started is just tell these guys who we are, and then we'll get down into business. Michael, you start.
Michael Willoughby, I'm Global Head of Metals and Mining and Transition Materials at HSBC. Was at Standard Chartered for a few years, JP Morgan for 22 years, lived in Japan, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia.
Andrew.
Thank you, Peter. Andrew Starkey, Executive Chair of a group of companies called Merdeka from Indonesia. I guess relevant to this conference given our position in nickel and nickel battery materials. Been at the company now for a number of years and a mining finance background.
Thank you. Tom Kendall, I'm with ICBC Standard Bank. I'm based in London. I run the bank's global metals financing and trading business. ICBC Standard Bank, essentially a JV between China's largest bank, Industrial Commercial Bank of China, and Standard Bank of South Africa.
Yeah, my name is Nariman Absametov. I am a CFO of Tauken Samruk mining company. We are the Kazakhstani-based local partner for such giants as Glencore, FMG, Rio, and others.
And you might mention that company is in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, all of them, they're present, and we have GVs with them. So.
Thanks, and I'm Matt Fifield, and I run Pacific Road Capital. We're a metals and mining private equity firm, concentrated investments around the world, running around $800 million of commitments, predominantly from U.S. investors.
Well, thanks everybody. So Matt's actually, Michael, I beg your pardon, has come here off the slopes in Switzerland to be with us today. So we'll get you started. You're running downhill already. Mm-hmm. So perhaps you could set the scene for us. Tell us a little bit about what you see the broad considerations are for our topic, and what's the scope for growth in this critical minerals area.
So I think the topic is super region. Okay, and that's an admirable aim and optimistic, but in reality, the industrial supply chain for EVs and most of these sub-segments are global. You know, just take the semiconductor supply chain, which has 320 suppliers in 50 different countries. All of those suppliers are basically an oligopoly. They do what they do best, and they reinvest back into that technology. EVs are the same. You know, I think it's not constructive to look at a country or even a region as doing end-to-end EVs. It's just not. It's not likely to be cost competitive. You do what you do well. So Indonesia does nickel well. Australia and Argentina do lithium well. China does precursor well. You know, batteries are done by different players, and you'll effectively have an oligopoly all the way up until the vehicle producer, and that can be a lot more diversified. So I think that's one fallacy to kind of stop. The second one is financial. You know, why are emerging companies and countries so competitive in the space? Well, their cost of equity capital is far lower. Why is that? Well, Western capital markets are completely institutionalized. They want, you know, their cash flows to match their financial obligations over the next 20 years, which is effectively infrastructure. You can't have volatility in those returns, and that is the very definition of an upstream company. And then those upstream companies, if they're linked to the midstream companies, well, where does a Western company get the capital to invest in that technology and the capital equipment with no defined return? So the over-institutionalization of the Western market makes it far less competitive in a global setting for the EV supply chain, which is why China, and to a lesser extent, Indonesia and others, and now Morocco and Saudi and others can join, because their cost of capital is simply lower. And then the other layer is geopolitics. Well, you know, and I diversity of supply chain, okay, I get it. That's the right way to think about it. But to try and exclude China from the supply chain, well, let's just think about it. China Without Chinese investment in EV components and the upstream, we're not driving EVs today in any sort of numbers, that are relevant. So thank you very much for supplying the components that allow us to transition our economies far faster. Okay, now we look at diversity of supply chain. Well, let's not think about it in terms of Saudi or the US saying we need to mine, produce, do everything where we are. Let's take the best-in-class technology. Let's put it in a geography where it can be competitive in power and labour costs. Otherwise, you're just simply building a very, very high-cost supply chain that is not going to be competitive in a very competitive consumer market, which is the EV.
That sounds great. So, Andrew, you're in Indonesia that Michael referred to, and your company's Merdeka Copper Gold and Merdeka Battery Materials. So, this is perhaps a test case for this super region that we're talking about. So what's made Indonesia such a significant player now in this part of the value chain?
Yeah, I think that's right. We're talking about how supply chains might change, how countries that have historically just been raw material providers can participate more in that value-adding stream to the extent that they have competitive advantages, as Michael's referred to. So Indonesia, I suppose, it's always had a policy of national ownership of major mining assets. So you started with a regulation in place that ensured that key assets would be held in national hands. And then that was supplemented with a policy that put limits on what type of refining and processing should take place in the country before exports were available. And the success that the sector that's really benefited has been the nickel sector. Indonesia, along with the Philippines, was synonymous with exporting 1% to 2% grade nickel ores, primarily to China. Almost overnight, the regulation came in. And there was certainly some dislocation during that period. The processing facilities hadn't been established. A number of the mining companies had no obvious end markets at that time. But within fairly short order, again, thanks primarily to Chinese capital, there was a sector developed, initially nickel pig iron, RKEF, and now when we look forward and think about critical materials and Indonesia's role of supplying well over 50% of the nickel required for nickel-based battery chemistry, that's come about through this establishment of the high-pressure acid leach plants in Indonesia. Again, that regulation, and I think it was more than a regulation, it was very clear to these Chinese investors, and subsequently Western and Korean and others have followed, but it was very clear that this was a policy supported consistently and determinedly by the President and by a very specific minister who took it upon himself to ensure that foreign investors that were prepared to invest in this enhancement of the supply chain in Indonesia through processing materials had one place to visit. There were no niggling issues at the regional level, at sundry departments. You could go to one place, you could present your pitch, and you could receive care and attention the whole way through as your project was put forward. So I think it's a combination, in summary, of course, the natural mineral endowment. Indonesia had that. It had the wherewithal to put in a policy that was unpopular and caused some dislocation, and then it was able to attract the private capital, offshore primarily, to pursue the development, again, with the consistency of government policy that they would stand by these businesses that had invested on the basis that their products were going to be exportable. So that's how I'd summarise the way Indonesia's achieved this position.
Yeah. So that was quite a deliberate and almost aggressive move by the Indonesian government. But they've had some opposition to this, haven't they? They're having to fight off a few challenges in this area.
Yeah, it's not the only sector where Indonesia and other developing countries have had a different opinion in terms of trade and what should happen within a country's boundaries and outside of it. And it's probably relates to that theme of international investors really knew that the Indonesian government meant it and wasn't going to waver and hasn't. So I think the return on investment from the first generation of processing plants is already well and truly positive and attractive. So the Indonesian government has absorbed some of that international pressure. And there's lots of arguments I won't get into now as to the merits of transporting 1% nickel in freighters across the South China Sea versus doing the processing in Indonesia, and what's best for global trade and ESG considerations. But the policy hasn't changed and doesn't look like it will change following the next set of elections.
Yeah, just one more follow-up question. And thinking about Merdeka in particular, and linking it to Michael's point about the supply chain, you're shipping 1%, not shipping 1%, you're shipping refined nickel, but that's not the end of the product. It's going somewhere else. You're still in that process.
Well, that's right, and I'm glad you've raised that point. We would naturally think of sending the product north, whether it's to China, whether it's to Korea, potentially Europe, but I guess a forum like this reminds us that there are other potential future destinations, because Indonesia's largely stopping at the MHP product, so a real intermediate battery material. Of course, there's discussions of going further downstream, but Indonesia will be a net exporter of that critical battery material for a long time to come. So that MHP and looking at supply chains aside from the generic Northeast Asia supply chains is something that the Indonesian producers are looking at as well.
Yeah, and I guess to your point, Michael, there's a technology issue at the end of that process where it actually ends up to become the battery grade material.
Look, the technology surrounding nickel chemistry in batteries is very, very consolidated. To just think that you are somehow going to catch up with recycling, with nickel chemistry, with CAM technology, anode technology, and you're going to scale it using Western capital all at once as a startup, and I can name 5 companies that are trying to do that. It's just not going to happen. There's too much going on, and it's changing too fast. The best that a country can hope for is, let's bring the supply chain onshore, let's establish it, and then as technology changes, you can displace the technology over time, if that's your concern. For Saudi should be thinking, right, let's bring the best-in-class technology, the best-in-class capital, the best-in-class upstream, downstream, link it all together in Saudi, and that's what we're going to do, midstream. From there, you can start investing up and downstream and broadening. But let's do the simple things first.
Yeah. Tom, as you might have picked up, Tom works for ICBC Standard Bank, so it's a mix of a Chinese bank and African-based bank, and with a heavy mining background for the bank. So where is the investment going in that downstream, upstream technology sort of flow of the supply chain?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the investment, and it really speaks to what we've been discussing already, that the investment goes where it's feeling welcome. It's directed partly by policy. It's directed by commercial realities. But in all of this, you kind of, when you're thinking about the investment, when you're thinking about China or you're thinking about Africa, when you start generalizing it, it muddies the picture, right? So looking at the China example, the investment historically has come from multiple entities, and those can be state-owned entities, those can be private entities, those are backed by export credit agencies.
East end of the super region, and you've got you've got the biggest market next door to you in China. So tell us a little bit about the situation in Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Peter. So you are right. So we are next back to China. We have the border with them, and of course, as the big mining country as Kazakhstan, we are top 10 producers of copper. We are number 1 producer of uranium. We are top 10 in zinc and lead. Almost of all our materials goes to China. So we have pretty linked connection infrastructure. There is also the huge governmental programs from China, as you know, the One Road, One Belt incentive, and it's been very active during the last 10 years. And it's also make the connection and links between our two countries much bigger. So that's why it's pretty good to be next to this market. So the cost of transportation is pretty low, especially in the railroad. And for us, it's and you know that during the last 2 years, with the situation with the Russia and this fail of supply chain, it's pretty hard to export to Western markets. So, and of course, the importance and the role of China is increasing in the region.
But your eggs, so you're getting all your eggs in the China basket, is that the...
No, I don't want to say that we are putting all the eggs in one basket. So as I mentioned before, Western companies are very active in Kazakhstan, and still the biggest investors to Kazakhstani economy is Western companies, US companies in the oil and gas sector, and of course such giants as Glencore, Rio, Fortescue is already entered the market. Also we have the huge interest from the junior companies that coming from Australia mainly and Canadian one. So I think that Kazakhstan tried to diversify all these risks. And the one interesting thing is that even we are very close to China, we don't have Chinese mining companies. So they're purchasing all the materials, but they're not still in the market. They're just looking for Kazakhstani one. And
very good.
The situation of Western companies, I would like to say, very stable, and the legislation and the stability is helping the companies entering this market.
It's very good how you guys all sat in the order that I was going to ask the questions. It's funny how it worked out that way. Matt, we have touched a little bit on governments and what action they've taken in Indonesia, but the geopolitical situation at the moment when it comes to critical minerals sort of adds another dimension to this whole discussion. So what role can governments play which is constructive in this situation where we have increasing demand, incredible demand for these minerals?
Well, thanks. And just a quick volume check. You can hear me okay in the back? Yep, okay. It's interesting. I've really been reflecting on each of the panelists as they've spoken with a unique viewpoint. And some of that viewpoint comes from where you're from. So if you're in the banking industry, you're in the flow business. You know, you're looking to lend money, have it be repaid, to have transactions. You know, if you're in the corporate business, you're working directionally. And as an investor, we're forming capital around ideas in the future. I guess I really strongly believe in the emergence of a super region, unlike perhaps you, because I feel like over the last 20 years, we've lived in an environment where we're pushing further and further towards the edge of efficiency, and capital wants to be free, right? So if capital wants to be free, it's going to go to where it'll make the highest returns, and that paradigm existed for, frankly, the entirety of my career. What we're seeing now is capital can't be free, okay? If capital could be free, Chinese companies could buy anything they want in Australia or Canada, but they can't. If capital could be free, then you would see technology, you know, we're in a de-globalizing world. And so in that de-globalizing world, nearshoring, friendshoring, and your neighbors are exceedingly important. And so as I think about, this is the third forum here, and over time, the progression towards Vision 2030, it's a very deliberate move by long-term patient stakeholders to create rifts in free capital to encourage and incentivize behavior. And what I see, you know, is the emergence of a logistical hub and a processing hub here that ends up being the bazaar of the world. If you want to step back for a second, national champions are going to win out. So, you know, Audi, VW will always have the support of the German government, and therefore the EU and all of the attendant, you know, IRMA and critical minerals policies and incentives will align around European auto manufacturers. IRA has got to be one of the biggest. It is in some ways an incentive package, and in other ways a not you package, right? And so it's very deliberate by the US to say not you, but yes you. Now a lot of fine print on what qualifies and what doesn't. And that's, you know, to deal with the practicalities of today's world. How are we going to actually make this happen from here to there? but it's a deliberate move to create new supply chains that funnel towards national champions. Because I don't think in the end the U.S. government really wants to subsidize, Volkswagen, or that the German taxpayer really wants to subsidize BYD or General Motors, right? And so the emergence of politics and alignment of supply chain is more important than ever. So from a practical standpoint, how it influences my business, we're headquartered in Australia. Our money comes largely from the US and from European family offices. We have, and we're looking at, should we open up a investment office here somewhere in the Gulf region? Because the trade flows are enormous. And what we see is that the projection of near political power as an investor, you can leverage your dollar against all these different programs, but you can also have a big brother regionally that will ameliorate some of the difficulties of investing in some of these jurisdictions. So it used to be, it was, for me with my accent, I was looking for DFC, IFC, Western New York-based NGOs and banks to invest alongside us. I would argue in North Africa and in this super region, you would want to have a strong partner aligned from an investment standpoint. So if something starts to go akimbo, you have people in the region with deep multi-generational networks and context that can help keep your investments on track. So, I guess geopolitics have never been more important. The world is fracturing into multiple supply chains. The game that's afoot here is, can this be a place where the low-cost energy can lead to processing, and those units can fill Michael's supply chain wherever they may be, left, right, north, south, whatever it may be. And it's incredibly important what's going on, and to think about whether you're a company looking to develop, or a minister looking to legislate, or an investor looking to put dollars to work, trying to contextualize what change you're happy in, and then how to figure out what's going on in those baskets.
Yeah. We're rapidly running out of time. I was going to ask you about the Australian government's intervention with the $4 billion fund. Do you want to describe that in one or two words?
Yeah. So I think that the other thing you're going to see, and this, by the way, if you're a student of history, just go look at the 1970s. In the 1970s, during the emergence of the Cold War, it was Gabon, manganese, cobalt out of DRC. It's all the same things, merely repeating themselves around another energy crisis and another emergence of political blocs. So all of this has happened before. All the programs we're seeing right now, small, medium-sized business loans, tax gives, like all of this has happened before, so none of it is new. It's simply adapted to where today is. So if you take something like the Australian Critical Minerals Fund, honestly, that's a signal of frustration more than anything, because there already is NAIF and CEFC and lots of different things where people are saying, hey, we can give you a lower cost of capital. Now all of a sudden, here's another pocket saying, we're really frustrated, we're legislating, can private capital, can private markets please deliver into what we're asking for? And the answer, as most practitioners here know, is that yes, but it takes a long time. So when I see, and it's going to happen again, by the way, there'll be another, I was at COP28 and it's a $60 billion climate fund, right? Frustration, how can we move faster? We'll make more money available, we'll give you negative cost of capital. That's just policymakers saying, we want to move faster against our targets. And the reality of the private sector saying, either one, I can't do it, two, I'm not prepared to do it, or three, I'm a little bit nervous about doing it. And over time, those programs will either fund or not fund and work out. But when you see those direct giveaway programs or those direct incentive programs, note that they usually come with strings, lots of them. Those strings make it hard for the private market to access them, so they don't get used. So you should really view them more as a sign of frustration, acceleration, price signal, than actual pocket of money to go attached to.
Yeah. I don't know whether I'm going to ask, the last question I'm going to ask, and you guys can answer it or we can just leave it hanging, but coming from China, where I've watched these guys developing the technology to get these critical minerals to battery stage. They've been doing this for 20 odd years. We're talking about finding critical minerals at the moment, but how are we going to accelerate this super region to be able to deliver on the technology as well? Where is the technology development going to come from, and how are we going to get the batteries made?
So that's one thing where I thought that, Michael, where I thought you were right on point, is that the technology is mature. And so you're watching innovative young companies find and license technology and or partner, because the auto manufacturers have their cell manufacturers have a long acceptance time frame for mobility applications for industrial minerals. So those processing technologies are mature. There's a lot of innovation, but I would agree with you that maturity angle is there. And I suspect that it's already happening. In the next 3 years, we'll see multiple licenses of different intermediate and high and late stage battery chains and established partners just simply moving into the region.
You're not worried? Michael, do you have a view?
I mean, the two going to $4 billion in Australia and the $3,750 per car that the IRA does is irrelevant in the broader scheme of things. I mean, ultimately you're trying to get the best auto to a consumer at the lowest cost, and that $3,750 doesn't do anything to do that. I mean, governments, I think, need to realise that the only way to diversify the supply chain is to incentivise private capital in a meaningful way, which, if you look at Saudi, they really have the ability to do so through the leverage that they're putting on capital projects in Saudi, and the way that they're looking to supplement upstream investments through equity investments through Manara and other vehicles, and that's the way to diversify the supply chain, rather than shut it out, embrace it, and provide competitive capital to compete with it.
Great. I'm really sorry we've run out of time. I would like to keep talking for another 20 minutes or 50 minutes if we could afford it, but we haven't. So thank you guys for making such a great contribution. It's late in the conference and I really appreciate you doing that. And thank you for coming to listen to us. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to take some questions from you from the floor, but it's been really great. And thank you for participation in FNF. We'll see you all next year.
Cheers.
Thank you.
lithium brine in Nevada.
It's not Dakar Pass. Oh, okay. Perfect.
But it's taking, I think we'll have a resource statement now, but it's taking a long time.
Phenomenal.
Your mic is on.
Okay. Thank you.
For any kind of confidential conversation, I don't know if it was the case, but just in case.
Thank you, sir.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for being with us at this end of this wonderful conference. I'm not going to say we finished with the best for the last, but let's admit that. I've had the chance to prepare this panel ahead of time with this very knowledgeable gentleman, talking about a topic of interest to all here, which is diversifying mineral supply and developing processing hubs in Africa and Central Asia. We have very good expertise from different continents and different jurisdictions. I'm going to let each of you maybe introduce yourself very briefly in a couple of words, and therefore we'll take after with the different questions. Please, Ambassador Pham, if you can just say a few words of yourself.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm Peter Pham, former United States Ambassador and Special Envoy for the Great Lakes and Sahel regions of Africa, and now in my post-government life, member of the board of various companies, including HPX, the Ivanhoe Company's exploratory and development company, of which I'm the non-executive chairman.
Thank you. Jean-Raymond Boule, please.
Thank you, Remy. My name is Jean Boule. I'm the chairman of Jean Boule Group. We're in mining, medtech, biotech, and agriculture power. Quite a diversified group. Our main business is mining. We've been lucky enough to have had some great discoveries, particularly Voisey's Bay in Labrador, which in fact Robert Friedland was my partner. We've also restarted the economy of Sierra Leone with two mines, a bauxite mine after the war, a bauxite mine and a rutile mine, titanium. We've had also many other discoveries, including ilmenite titanium in Madagascar, Toliar Sands. So we are quite a special group in that we've been lucky enough to have made major multi-billion-dollar discoveries.
Thank you, Jean. Roland, if you can say a few words about yourself.
Nice to meet you. My name is Roland Gittrid, and I'm the chairman of Livista Energy, which is a refiner of lithium in the European Union. Our first plant is right now in feasibility study, and it will be in Germany, in Emden at the border of Germany and the Netherlands. And it will produce 40 tons of LCE, mainly hydroxide, 30,000 tons, and 10,000 tons of lithium carbonate battery grade.
Thank you. Craig, you're next on the line.
Yes, thank you very much. So my name is Craig Sherba. I'm the CEO of a company called Next Source Materials. What we have is a graphite mine in Madagascar. It's been operational since March of 2023. We're also constructing the downstream anode processing facility for natural graphite in the country of Mauritius, and have very aspirational plans of expanding that anode capability around the world.
Christopher, you are at every single conference. I'm not sure you need an introduction, but please give us a few words by yourself.
I'm Christopher Eccleston from Hogarth & Company, and I'm an equities analyst and commodity strategist in London.
Very good. And last but not least, Tariq.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. I'm Sahibzada Tariq. I'm a founder and CEO of two mining companies, Pirana Company and TM Resources. We operate in Pakistan, and we have properties for copper, graphite, and lithium.
So maybe I'll start with you, Ambassador, with the first question. We're talking about diversifying mineral supply chains, looking at processing hub, your expertise, especially on Africa. I wanted to know, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to the development of responsible, resilient mineral processing chains, especially in Africa, and how can government work with the private sector to develop them sustainably?
If you don't mind my taking the liberty of doing so, let me give you three quick answers to that one question. I think there are three things. First and foremost, energy.
Okay.
In many developing countries, Africa I know best, but others, it's a question of getting the energy and to do these things. I have at home 2 refrigerators that consume more electricity in a year than the average family in Africa. So that energy piece must be resolved. Secondly, infrastructure. It's not enough to have the resources. The super region has abundant resources, but how do you bring that to market in a way that is not only cost effective, but increasingly, as the market demands, responsible. And then thirdly, the question of investment. Getting the investment not just for the energy and the infrastructure, but also to develop the human capital necessary so that these regions truly benefit from what they have in the subsoil. And the last part, and I'll wrap it up very, how can you do this? And I think we're beginning to see a new way forward in mining. That's a true partnership. And I'm no longer a US government official, but speaking of a program the US government has done. The building of the Lobito corridor that other speakers have spoken about in the plenary between Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zambia, and eventually expanding to other corridors. Infrastructure that provides energy, much of it renewable, transportation to get things to market, and then finally building up a holistic method, a multi-user infrastructure that benefits these countries. Okay. And one last plug, we recently, one of the companies I'm associated with, Ivanhoe Mines, recently sent its first shipment of copper to port at Lobito. It took 8 days, arriving last day of 2023. Previously, that went by truck all the way down to Durban, a journey that took several weeks. We now did it in 8 days in a far greener, more responsible manner. So, and that's a partnership. It wasn't the U.S. imposing. The U.S. government helped facilitate it. The private sector came in, and it's a partnership of equals with the countries involved.
No, that's great. Maybe turning to you, Jean. I mean, you're leading a very diversified group present in many jurisdictions, whether from graphite, looking at green magnesium and others. You know, when you're looking at Saudi Arabia in the middle of all those potential processing hubs and maybe centralizing them, what are you think the best thing to highlight? Professor Pham mentioned logistics, mentioned infrastructure, investment, and cheap energy, which is something that characterizes Saudi Arabia. Can you give us a little bit of your vision of what Saudi Arabia can play here?
Well, first of all, I very much agree with Peter on partnerships. And while we're on the subject, first of all, this country has been blessed with abundant resources, more than just about any other country in the world. And the other blessing from God is its people. And I would like to congratulate Excellency Minister Al-Kariev, as well as His Excellency Minister Al-Muda, for having now established the best, and I'll make that a declaration. This is the best mining conference in the world. I know that there are 3 others, but with due respect to the Canadians and South Africans and Australians, this is now the best venue and the best organized with the highest quality people. In France, they say chapeau. They've done it. So I am, and I'm sure all of people in this industry are very impressed, and particularly the way that this fantastic speech that the Excellency made telling us that we're part of a family, we're always welcome here, and to come and invest. So we all voted with our feet, and here we are. As to the rest of it, yes, Peter, I agree, it's about partnership. I'll give you an example. After the war, we were asked to try and get the mines going in Sierra Leone. We had the backing of the US government. I'm in fact the director of Corporate Council in Africa. We meet once a year, 2,000 people, to get the heads of state of Africa and its people together with the administration, which you're familiar with, Peter. So we do that. So we had the backing of Americans, we had the backing of European through SysMin. And then, of course, you know, you've got to make sure that the local people are happy. Whether it's building mosques, building churches, you've got to make sure that the central government gets what it wants out of it. And so it's basically a puzzle that you have to round the edges and put together on many levels. And then the financing from OPEC, financing from IFC. Very important to bring IFC into projects. You need them as partners. And if possible, you've got to give some of the upside to the local people, that they know that, okay, if this works, you're going to make a lot of money, but they need to make a lot of money too at the same time. So How do you do that? Well, you have many instances where they have some sort of carried interest, or sometimes, for instance, we're in Greenland. We have a few discoveries in Greenland, including Feldspar, and the government of Denmark and Greenland have actually bought part of a company. And so we're true partners. We both tend to do well. And I think we need to make sure that whichever country you work in, you need to make sure that they have a stake with you within your company. So I think that's very important, because that certainly didn't happen in the past. It's beginning to happen now. And then to the partnership and what people get out of it. After discovering Voisey's Bay, we had to deal with a lot of different issues, and one of them was the First Nations, the Inuit and Innu. So we spent a long time negotiating, and at the beginning it was quite aggressive, but in the end we signed an agreement which today is a template for all mining companies in Canada. The first place they go to is our agreement, and basically we gave the right of refusal for first contracts to all the Inuits and Innu. So they have a first right of refusal to all subcontracts. So, and it's when we went to Labrador, they had a 40% unemployment rate because the fish had all gone. Well, today the place is absolutely booming because of the entrepreneurial spirit. So you've got to put all these pieces together. It's not easy, and you've got to be true partners. You've got to be transparent, and that's extremely important. And at the end of the day, it's also having the right scientists. It's not just going to a country. It's actually making sure that you get the best chance of a discovery.
Okay.
Sorry, but I'm not too long-winded. We have friends here who need to also speak.
Please,
thank you very much.
Maybe transitioning to you, Roland. When we look at different processing hubs, I know as a lithium refiner, you actually studied different possibilities for implementation of your projects. Germany, France, now you're here in the Middle East. What is to you the competitive advantage that the Middle East can have, in Saudi Arabia especially, and what would be the road forward onto this?
Well, the first thing is the mining. You have 500 million Europeans, which are pretty close, and they're going to need a lot of raw material, especially lithium. So developing a mining industry will take time, a large mining industry, but that's very important. And the second, I think, opportunistic. Europe will need 500,000 tons of refined lithium. It doesn't by 2030. It doesn't produce 1 ton as of today. So a lot of the contracts we are negotiating for a plant right now, we can't even contract them. We won't be able to honor them in full. We'll have to give to other partners, mostly Chinese right now. So some of our contracts will start next year, will be told in China until our plant in Europe is operational. And I think that's where Saudi Arabia, which is a refining hub in petrochemicals, which has advantage in cost in gas, reagents, electricity, can be part of the, I think, EMA, European Middle East, where if you have your marketing team in the European Union with the contracts, you can put a part of this contracting strategy in the Middle East, in Saudi. So technically, look at the movement of lithium. It will go mainly from Australia to the ports of Europe. So if you have a stop on the way in Saudi Arabia through the Red Sea, and you sell it to the final consumer in Europe until the market here becomes big enough that it's self-sustained, it's an opportunity, I think. So I see it more as a joint venture with Europe, or the US, it works as well, a partnership.
No, very good, this idea of partnership, different jurisdiction. When we talk about different supply chains and processing hub, the key concept here is vertical integration. I think, turning to you, Craig, you have graphite operations in Madagascar. At the same time, you're developing processing hubs nearby in the Mauritius Island. When you look at this element of vertical integration of supply chain, what is feasible to be done, and what are the best practices that you'd like to highlight?
Absolutely. So thank you. So vertical integration, I think, is absolutely essential if you're looking at critical materials. They're called critical materials because they're critical for industrialization moving forward here right now. And really, it's about security of supply and, from a business perspective, security of price. To have the security of supply, if you can have the actual raw material that goes into the processing material, you have a competitive advantage. There's many OEMs that were left in the lurch a couple of years ago just because of the silicon shortage. So really just a part that's only costing a couple of dollars for the actual cost of a very expensive vehicle, production lines were stopped. So you have to have that kind of critical supply chain to go in there vertically integrated, I think is very important for that. From a business perspective, you also want cost certainty. And the cost certainty is important because for these critical battery materials, it's not just about delivering the actual physical quantum of material. You actually have to do a value add process portion to that. So there is some technological things that go in between there. Because of that, it's a complicated process and it requires you to have offtake. To have offtake, you have to have a steady price base, and if you actually have vertical integration, you can help control part of that price base. What I think is really important now is really kind of establishing global hubs, I guess, for processing capability, because what that does is it really addresses that security of price. What the processing hubs do is if you have a mine is located wherever you can find the mineral resources, and I heard actually a little anecdote yesterday that you don't find too many miners that take a subway to work. They're in very remote locations. Processing hubs, however, you can put wherever you want them to. What you have to do is you put it in a matrix for the logistics, and really what makes for a business perspective really a lot of sense. What's interesting about the kingdom that we're in right now is that they're very well situated basically to process where most of these minerals are coming from, which is Africa, and then go into the European Union, into North America as well. The processing component as well, it requires a lot of energy, it requires infrastructure for road systems, a highly educated workforce, so on and so forth. So that infrastructure, to pick an excellent place for that. A processing hub, you can get economies of scale with the more of these groups that you have, and you can actually get synergies where a waste stream from one product can actually be a product stream for another. So they're much more efficient. So I think moving forward in the future here, all of these critical battery materials will have to be processed in processing centers, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very well located for that.
Oh, thank you, Craig. When we prepared for this panel, Christopher, we had a fascinating conversation on the geopolitical dimension of processing hubs. When you look, obviously, the alternative to Saudi Arabia could be an alternative to China here. There's a series of issues in Europe in terms of being able to develop supply chains and mineral processing. Where do you see where Saudi Arabia could fit, and what are the geopolitical considerations to this?
Yeah, thank you. One of the problems we have is that China has essentially a policy that I call the mothership policy, which is basically, it doesn't matter where it's mined, it has to be taken back to the mothership for processing. And that's a very China-centric view. Results in the value added dropping off in China, because in many cases the mining activity is not actually the value-added activity. It is the processing and the downward use of the supply chain of the end products. And China's made sure that that has happened. And we've seen increasing tension between various countries around the world that have said, we want to see the processing happening in country. Now, Saudi Arabia is brilliantly positioned on the superhighway between Asia and Europe that runs through the Gulf, runs through the Red Sea rather, and runs through the Suez Canal. So it's a logical extension of that for Saudi Arabia to want to mobilize its energy surplus, combine it with its enormous workforce that it's potentially got to put to work here, and implant along the coast of the Red Sea significant refining capacity. Now, to ensure, though, that that product actually is mobilized and sent to the refineries in Saudi Arabia, rather than going to other countries, whether they be China or elsewhere, we really need to see companies like Ma'aden, other Saudi companies involved in the mining space, extending their reach by buying mining operations around the world, and to ensure that that then flow of material actually will be coming to the refineries established within the kingdom and utilizing the resources, both human and energetic, that the country has to ensure that the value added essentially drops off here. And to talk about refineries in the DRC is all well and good, but as we've seen, attempts by the DRC to reclaim the refining capacity from China back into the DRC have essentially failed. The only country that's really achieved much on that front has been Indonesia. The best way that you can ensure that you get the product so that you can refine it is to actually own the assets. And as we've seen with Manara in particular taking 20% stake in Vale's base metal division, this is the way that it will be achieved. You've got to own the assets to own the flow.
Well, thank you, Tariq. Thank you, Christopher. Just maybe to finish this first round of questions, we might have time for 1 or 2 sentences of concluding thoughts for each one of you, but I'd like to finish with Tariq. When we look at regional alternative, Pakistan actually offers an interesting set of assets and an option for processing here. However, Pakistan is one of those jurisdictions that has been kind of looked down from investors and been seen as challenging at some level. How can you try to attract investors better and make the case for a country like Pakistan that it can play its role in terms of the global supply chains?
Yeah, Pakistan recently has been facing a lot of challenges with the problem of access to capital. You need resources to exploit resources. If there are no resources available, you cannot do anything. So the main reason for this was the fiasco, the Reko Diq fiasco. And that has been resolved, fortunately now. We are all aware of that. The project is active. They are updating their resource and feasibility studies. If you look at the map, this is the Tatian copper belt. There are 3 main ore bodies that has been identified so far. There is Sarchashma in Iran, Reko Diq in Pakistan, and Misanak in Afghanistan. There are a lot of other resources that awaits discovery. Some of them could be as big as Reko Diq or even bigger than Reko Diq. It's just a matter of time to come and do the discovery. Now, what have we done so far to reverse the events or the effects of the events that has left a lot of doubts with the investors? First of all, we have done the Investment Protection Act to protect the investors who come into Pakistan. And whatever happened with the Reko Diq case should not be repeated again. The investors cannot be taken to any court of law within Pakistan by any entity or individual. So that ensures that they are protected with their investment and with the asset that they are investing into. Number 2 is the creation of SIFC. This is the Special Investment Facilitation Council. It's a single window operation to make all those things easy for the investor to come in doing the... there are a lot of departments involved to get your permitting done. So this is basically the platform that will make doing business easier for the investors. And it will also avoid the bureaucratic hurdles that normally people encounter in countries of the similar environment.
Thank you, Tariq. Maybe when we all contribute very well in terms of this question of diversification of supply chains, of different options for processing hubs. I'd like maybe to invite you just maybe to react to what was said here and have a few concluded sentences, maybe with you, start again, Ambassador Pham.
Okay, thank you. No, I share the sentiments of my fellow panelists here. I think we all believe we're here because we believe that there's a future, and that future transition cannot occur without increasing mining, but that can only be done responsibly in partnership with the areas that are being exploited, in partnership across the super region. And I think this conference, I compliment the host for having us here, 3rd year in a row, and I think the opportunities and the networks here will open up hopefully a brighter future than the years we've lived through.
Thank you. Jean, if I can turn to you for those thoughts.
Thank you. Just like we put a nickel refinery in Newfoundland and Labrador, we're looking here at doing a magnesium project using olivine, local olivine to produce magnesium, green magnesium. which is a lot less polluting than what's happening in China. So that's a project that we're focusing on right here, and we're looking forward to working with the people of Saudi Arabia and the Kingdom.
Roland, maybe if you can bring your knowledge there.
Pretty similar to everything that was said. I think it's phenomenal to see the energy here, the entrepreneurial spirit at a country level. Having spent the last few years doing a project in Europe, it is very different there. So I think the energy is phenomenal, and I have no doubt that there will be opportunities here. And like I said, if we can join both supply chains, it's a win-win situation. And to diversify from China, I think it's one of the serious options for Europe.
Craig, maybe.
Absolutely. So I think that the mining industry is changing right now, changing drastically as well. And then it's not so much more about the mining, it's about the processing portion of that as well. And the processing capabilities, especially with these critical materials moving forward, have to be localized in regions where they're going to be utilized, or it makes more sense logistically moving forward. What's very enviable, I guess, in the kingdom right now is the fact that they have all the logistics, they have the expertise for that, but most importantly, they have the ability to go to scale. Because the mining, I guess, world of tomorrow is going to be about clusters of a number of different critical materials being put together to build out the infrastructure to move forward to actually supply the automobiles of the future, the grid storage, so on and so forth. So it's a very unique time that we're in right now. This is almost like kind of being back at the Industrial Revolution, I guess. Nobody quite knows where it's going, but they know the direction is positive.
No surprise, Christopher, you're next in line, literally.
Thank you for that. The reality is the old adage in the property sector is location, location, location. You add to that cheap and abundant energy, the kingdom wins hands down in looking to be a processing hub, not just for Europe and Asia, but for the world.
Perfect. And Tarek, maybe outside of Pakistan, what's your view here on the ideas of having a regional hub for processing?
Yeah, the majors used to be the real decision makers in the past. Now, if you look at the requirements that we face, we need 1,400 million tons of copper alone to meet the 2050 target. So you need to have the juniors, the artisanal and small-scale miners come into play to try to meet that challenge. So what is required is to have all those small processing facilities, for example, like flotation cells, as small as 100 tons per day, up to probably maybe as big as 1,000 tons per day processing capacity to be installed at the mine site, so that those low-grade ore is upgraded to 25-30% and then shipped to the smelter.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insight. I know I've been asking to just put in a few minutes a lot of your knowledge. I was very privileged to have longer conversations with you, so I know you had much more to say, but I want to say thank you for your insight here of this panel. Thank you. Bye.
We're going to
hello.
start with you.
Yeah. Good evening, Riyadh. Hello. This is the last panel session of the day, and I know enthusiasm is still high, so let's get it together. I am so excited to be able to introduce our next panel. We're looking at building a battery manufacturing industry. We have some severe experts on this panel, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. It's only 30 minutes long, so we will try and answer any questions at the end if we have time, so do put your hand up at the end. So hello everyone, my name is Veronica Bolton-Smith, or Ronnie when I'm not in trouble. I am the CEO of the Connect Africa Network, connecting investors to investment opportunities in Africa. 20 years essentially supporting investment drive into the continent of Africa. And I'll start off with a quick summary and then I'll pass over to my colleagues on the panel to introduce themselves. So I just wanted to share what a difference 15 years can make. In 2010, batteries powered our phones and computers, and today they are powering our cars and our homes as well. Over the last 15 years, a surge in lithium-ion production drove down prices to the point that for the first time in history, electric vehicles became commercially viable from the standpoint of both cost and performance. The next phase will be looking at how we can build utility-scale storage. Many markets in Asia and America dominate the battery manufacturing space, and it will be intriguing to hear from our panel what learnings we can take and what has been working well and what hasn't been working so well, and also where the opportunities for investment lie, and what those barriers to investment might be in the sector, and how, of course, to confirm financing for these projects. Also, a key consideration is sustainability when building any industry, but never more so than in this space of battery manufacturing and processing. And we will hear from our industry experts today on this. Also key to the discussion will also be how Africa, with its plethora of critical and rare earth minerals, can generate value addition for the continent facing a population boom in 2030. Job creation and value addition are of vital importance to a continent that will have an extremely high youth population. With all this in mind, battery manufacturing and processing is changing on a literal daily basis. I read with interest 2 days ago, and I'm sure many of you saw the same article, that Microsoft, via AI, has identified a new material to reduce the use of lithium in batteries. It is estimated that it will reduce up to 70% of lithium use. If this recent discovery is anything to go by, it is that we can't rely on any one type of chemistry when looking at battery processing and manufacturing. Essentially, will governments and companies back the correct course, or is this an industry still in a huge R&D phase? Let me now hand over to my panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the questions. So over to you, Wilfredo.
So I'm Wilfredo Reyes. I am the founder and CEO of the Critical Minerals Association, USA, operating out of Washington, D.C.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ling Lu. I'm based in Hong Kong, working for Standard Chartered in the metals and mining business, mainly responsible for the M&A and also financing for the Chinese clients as well as Korean and Japanese companies.
Thank you. My name is Alawi Shaban Swaburi. I'm Tanzanian, based in Germany, and the founder of the Africa Battery Initiative.
Hi everyone, my name is Greg Pitt and I lead Worley's strategic growth in battery materials. For those that don't know of us, Worley is one of the largest engineering and project delivery companies operating in this sector.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so my first question to you, Ling, at Standard Chartered Bank. You're a well-known bank working across multiple jurisdictions, and I'm keen to understand what you've witnessed as the key trends in battery manufacturing and processing, and also where are the competitive markets, and how can countries and continents make themselves more competitive in this space? And what have you been, I would love you to share some success and exit stories as well, and what governments might be able to do to make themselves investor ready.
Sure, Ronnie.
Lots of questions there.
Yeah, lots of questions. So I guess, first and foremost, lots going on in the battery space. But the biggest theme that we are seeing is a bifurcated supply chain is formulating, which is driven by the geopolitical tensions. So the Inflation Reduction Act has been driving the investment activities into North America with the intention to set up a new supply chain that is independent from China. So you've seen it's driving the Western companies to build new production facilities across the supply chain, especially around critical minerals and also the battery components. But in the meantime, it's also driving the Chinese companies to invest out of China to, especially in the countries that have free trade agreement with the US. But there are lots of interest in the kingdom as well. They would like to come into the kingdom and build those facilities, and that's mainly attracted by the incentive policies. So that's one trend. The other one that I am seeing is the regional production hubs that are being established. So for example, Indonesia has become a dominating player in nickel processing, producing close to 50% of the global supply. But sitting here, I do see there's lots of potential for this region. This is a super region. For example, Morocco, would it become the next Indonesia? Probably yes. Over the past 12 months, we have seen lots of Chinese and also South Korean investment into the country, trying to establish the battery materials production facilities. And also, Morocco has a cleaner energy mix, which is ideal as we look for net zero battery supply chain. So I guess this addresses your question one. And then if we look at what are the countries that's leading in this space, I would think is Asia, namely China, South Korea, and Japan. As we all know, Japan commercialized the production of lithium-ion batteries in the 1990s. And then it's the South Korean companies, Samsung, LG, who caught up. And now it's really the Chinese who have scaled up the production and also leading on the technological innovation. So how did they do that, and what parallels can we draw from them? I think mainly three things. One is the integrated supply chain. So if we take BYD is a perfect example. So they basically produce everything except the windscreen and the tire. So this not only minimizes the supply risk, but also it ensures the margin when the commodity prices are trending up. The second one is technological innovation. Lots of people, when they look at CATL, they kind of, surprised. It's a young company. It's only established in 2011. However, it's originated from ATL, another company that had been producing batteries for laptops and mobile phones over the past 10 years before CATL was established. So there has been significant technological accumulation, and also CATL has been spending significant money on the R&D. Each year is around 5% to 8% of its annual sales, and the number was around $2 billion last year. Last but not least, I would think is the effective public policy and also a culture that embraces competition. So recently we have seen lots of trade barriers and also protection. If we take example of Tesla. So when Tesla was first brought to China, lots of people were calling the wolf is coming. Everyone's kind of afraid because for the smaller and also less competitive companies, they would easily go bust. So yes, short-term pain, of course, is causing short-term pain, but long-term wise, if we look back now, it has really cultivated the development of an integrated supply chain. Is definitely beneficial in the long run. And I think that also explains why when Tesla came to China, China lifted the ban of foreign control and let Tesla to have 100% of the ownership. So maybe I'll just stop there.
Thank you. There's lots to consider in there. I'll be heard. Yeah, thank you. Lots to consider, and for any new markets looking to move into this space, I think there's definitely be able to look at Southeast Asia for some examples of what's worked. Moving on to you, Greg. A key consideration when building any new industry is this issue of sustainability. Worley is a world-leading business delivering sustainable change. What do you look for when working with multiple critical and rare earth minerals to develop batteries and to deliver this in a sustainable way? What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what would you like to see more of to continue to drive sustainable change, given that this is down to multiple stakeholders?
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. Look, I think one thing that many people not that familiar with the industry don't understand deeply is the actual impact of the production of the minerals, their refining, their processing, the environmental impact of this value chain that produces ultimately at the end of the day an electric vehicle. We all think electric vehicles are a critical part of our future as we transition to an electric future. But I think particularly many consumers, but even those that are new to the industry or have operated in parallel industries, don't understand the true environmental impact and perhaps a broader impact of what it takes to make these end products and what it takes to make every intermediate product along the way. So I'm glad you asked, because sustainability, certainly for Worley, this is absolutely fundamental to how we have pivoted and focused our own organisation to look at what can we be doing to develop assets, to develop projects that are sustainable in their nature, not just in the way they are built, but also in the types of products or commodities that they produce or refine. But it doesn't always work out the way you would expect. And to perhaps answer your question, what's worked well, what hasn't, let me start with what hasn't. We've seen, I'll talk about a couple of examples, but we've seen a project we did a few years ago up in Finland, which was a PCAM facility, for those that know what that means, cathode material, which after we had finished the work, we built the plant, the client had their permit revoked by the local authorities when it was realised how much waste was coming out of this, or was going to come out of this facility once it was going to be made operational. Waste streams, sodium sulfate, particularly in cathode material manufacturing and the refining of its components, is a huge waste stream, a huge problem. This event, which has now been sorted out, they put a crystallizer on and they're now moving through to startup. But it triggered a recognition, a realisation, certainly in the European community, which are now seeing start to flow elsewhere, that these things aren't sustainable by their very nature. The processes are complex. The amount of energy required to operate all of the facilities along the value chain is enormous. And there's an education process needed across communities, across participants in the industry, across the governments and the authorities as to what actually the impact is. Because I think if it's not understood at the outset, then you run into trouble as you move down through your project or your investment plan. On the flip side, we are seeing, and perhaps now more recently, your positive responses, a different way of thinking about how to go about asset development in this sector. And as I think as Ling was saying, outside of Asia, the rest of us, the rest of the world is having to react quickly and move really quickly into this market and develop and build new value chains, new industries at pace. There is opportunity to do that and think about how to actually be more sustainable, not just in an individual asset necessarily, but how to look at the energy mix. Where can you get low cost, reliable, green or renewable energy from? Nordics, Quebec, good places to start, but Morocco as well shaping up. What are the waste streams coming out? How can you turn a waste stream into a byproduct or a feedstock for some other adjacent facility? How can you recycle water, energy through these plants? And so it's taking a different mindset to perhaps the traditional project development approach that certainly we're used to, and applying not just assessing sustainability throughout a project, but using it to actually drive the decision making and the design process as you work through. And a couple of sort of specific examples we see, perhaps at a little bit more macro level, again, in Europe, a lot of the chemical majors in Europe that are operating in this space, BASF, Umicore, Northvolt, are now considering closed-loop systems as a basis, as a default approach to development. And what I mean by that is they're not just thinking about the linear trajectory of a mineral from the ground through into ultimately an end product that's then sold to a consumer, used and disposed of. They recognise that this industry has to be circular. Now in Europe, they are mandated to be circular. They are mandated to recycle, right? And it's probably currently world's best practice in terms of sustainability policy settings. And so they've reacted and said, well, we are going to build closed-loop systems, circular systems, where we will recover the material where it comes out as waste, out as rejects, out as off-spec, damaged, or end of life, and bring that back into the value chain. So we're actually consuming less virgin material, and we're extracting more value out of the minerals because we can reuse them over and over again. So yeah, we're seeing it work well, but at the same time, even a recycling development, it's not a single party that's involved. The logistics in collecting batteries, collecting end-of-life vehicles, bringing them all back in across, as in Europe, various different countries, requires a huge number of stakeholders to be involved to make that actually work in reality.
Thanks, Greg. And very clear from what you've said there that sustainability can actually be of great benefit to any strategy development people are thinking about, rather than thinking of it as a buzzword, which I think often...
Well, what I'd say, because I think many people think, if I'm going to have to make it more sustainable, it's probably going to cost me more to do so. And my response would be, yes, if you think about it after the fact. But if you bring that thinking right into the early phase, as you are even conceiving an investment, and you think about how do I do this in a sustainable way from the start, it does not need to necessarily cost more. And there are some companies out there, Vulcan in Germany, that has gone about with a clear plan that we're going to make zero carbon lithium. We are not going to add any carbon into the atmosphere as a result of the lithium we produce from the ground, which I think is tremendous. Let's see how they go as they get their plans unfolding. But
thanks so much for that. I'll move on to you, Sawbury, from the Africa Battery Initiative. So moving from sustainability on to looking at how Africa can create value addition on the continent. And I think it's vital we think in that framework because there's a plethora of critical minerals in Africa, namely cobalt and lithium, which has recently been discovered in many pockets of the continent. And I'm just keen to understand, how can the continent create value addition? What are the steps that need to be taken? Maybe you could share also a little bit about the recent development in the DRC and Zambia with the recent MOU signing and Zambia now being the off-taker to make some batteries there. If you share with us and the audience, what can we learn from that? Is it possible to replicate across the continent what's gone on in the DRC and Zambia? I think that's very exciting. And also, could you share with us what you see, what we might see other countries on the continent develop, if we see other countries on the continent develop similar strategies, and what the time and cost implications might be for that?
Thank you very much indeed for having me here. So I think that related to a question on value addition in Africa. So our institution, the Africa Battery Initiative, is really focusing on making sure that we promote the critical mineral investment from the oil supply chain, making sure that we start from extraction, exploration, up to the refinery. So from that point of refinery, we according to our policy that most of African countries now are not allowing any critical mineral to be exported without the value being added in that country. So our role is to identify investors from all over the world to come up to that point of a refinery. And after that, 70% of the refinery critical mineral is allowed to be exported to the country of investor, and 30% of that to remain in that country for purpose of, let's say, battery manufacturing. That is where we come now to that point. So, of course, we don't have the fund or the critical, the fund to go from the mining up to that point. So we rely on investor to bring us to that point of a refinery. So he asked me about the Zambia and the DRC. Of course, the project has been signed between Zambia, DRC, in cooperation with the United States, which has also shown a very big interest to support the establishment of the electric car manufacturing plant in Zambia. But I'm having a very wonderful example that I would like to share with the people here, that the example of Tanzania. I'm from Tanzania, and the project of the battery manufacturer is African Battery Baby, because we started that one, and up to this point I can explain everything that we have been going through. So in order to have electrical battery manufacturing plant, you need at least 5 pillars. So one pillar is, of course, to have the critical mineral, which we get from the 30% remaining in our country after the investor has taken 70% to his country of origin. And then, of course, we need investor, we need the technology. This is the point. So in relation to the technology, we are cooperating with the Chinese Central South University of China. We are also cooperating with the Hubei University of China, which is now going to create a very huge battery technology center at the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. This has been agreed. And then the third point, of course, is in off-taker. So in order to have the component produced, you need to have an off-taker. So we are now in discussion with a company like VW. Of course, I'm based in Germany for the last 25 years. I've been living there. So we have VW, we have everybody, and we even have a BYD from China, which is really very much interested to engage in off-taking. But the first point of pillar is, of course, not only technology. Now, university I mentioned, they are ready to do that. But we are also involved with one of the biggest electrical manufacturing entity on our planet, which is CATL from China. So they are also very much interested to cooperate with Tanzania in making sure that this electrical manufacturing plant will be kicked start within this year. So this is one point. But the most important, as you said, is energy, utility. So where do we get the energy in order to have the refinery and the smelting? So this is a very high energy consuming undertaking. So Tanzania has addressed this point where we have maybe before the end of this year, we'll be having 2.1 gigawatt of hydroelectric power plant, which is already, it will be up and running before the end of this year. This is one. And then, of course, as we're talking about the energy mixture, we have wind power and some other small hydroelectric power. Combining them together, we'll be making sure that we have enough energy to address the smelting but this is one point. But commotion from A to Z, you also need, of course, not to leave, to have a zero footprint when it comes to commotion. That is where we have SGR, the standard railway gauge connecting Tanzania, Burundi up all the way to DRC. So making sure that from the commotion of the critical mineral from that point, where there will also be looking to be exported to the port of Dar es Salaam, so everything is like a zero emission. So this is more or less the concept that our country are sharing, in particular Tanzania now. So we are there maybe before the end of this year. Now, the one thing very important, the president of China is visiting our country in this year. So it will be another added value to the, making sure that we finalize this process.
Excellent news, and we hope that visit will benefit, skills exchange and so forth. But something also just to add to what you were saying there, there's the Lobita corridor that's just been signed as well. So that presents some interesting opportunities for trading and looking at that corridor in terms of how to develop the value chain. So we look and we're excited by that. And thanks for that insight. Last but not least, Wilfredo. So Wilfredo is the CEO of the Critical Minerals Association in the USA and presents the US angle on this panel. And I just wondered what you would say are the key competitive aspects of the US battery industry versus global competitors.
How much time you have? That's a loaded question, but
everyone wants to go home, but go on.
I'll be short and sweet. I'm optimistic about how the market and the U.S. has sent a clear message as to how we are incentivizing the battery industry. I would say, to summarize it in 3 key aspects, we've got, I would say, strong potential because of the tech edge that the U.S. has in terms of company, IP protection, R&D capacity, universities, academia help, all those, including the consumer applications, which I know that many people often, when they think about the battery industry, immediately they go to EVs. But there's so much more applications that are important for national security and defense in the U.S. and abroad, and also for storage. There's and consumer electronics, which, by the way, I'm trying to teach my nephews and nieces where the connection is between the mining and the phone, which is hard for them to understand, but we're making progress. Anyhow, those 3 aspects, I would say, that the strong potential that the market has, it's a good sign. The second aspect of it would be the strong allocation or strategic allocation of resources in the U.S. I'm sure you're all aware that Nevada, Arizona, and some other states coming online. Tennessee recently announced a big commitment from LG to produce the biggest cathode and anode manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. And one thing that sometimes people overlook, and this is something that I've learned throughout my legal career as an attorney in the U.S., started and shifted from federal court to economic development, and now I'm here. And I strongly believe that we have an opportunity. Where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. We feel that the U.S. has 3 levels of government. I see it as an economic development venture. People often concentrate in what the federal government offers, which is the incentives, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, and Science Act, and the tech hubs. All those are fine. But I would say that in order for your project or venture to have a bigger probability of being successful, you go bottom up, meaning you go and you meet with the locals, counties, cities, municipalities, majors, and you, at the same token, try to find partners on the state side, which have very, very good teams that do economic development that help a venture. Even if it is an R&D capacity, you'll find a lot of incentives there, which leads to my third aspect, which is strong supporting policies. And all those policies, people often focus on the federal side. I would encourage, which is what we do as an association, help members navigate on a more strategic fashion where those pockets of funding are. And you can leverage those for your capital stack. It's not just the federal government. And I would say, to summarize it, to stay, as a global leader, the U.S. needs to focus on 3 areas that we as an association also have promoted and enabled to make connections and networking opportunities for many of our members, but we bridge the gap between the public and private sectors so that we can have real industry representatives talking about their products. Because I think, if anything, history has shown that we're in a pivotal moment. We are in what I know that many others have called the new industrial revolution of our generation. And we can all contribute. And that's what I intend to do, because it's not just talking about sustainability. It's fun to be in panels or do speaker engagements, but I strongly believe that there's an output and an action part which leads to the commitment that I have right now as CEO in the Critical Minerals Association. So I would say, to summarize, we focus on cost effectiveness of the technologies because it's very important in order to stay competitive. We also see the part of building a robust supply chain. As I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard about the initiatives that the government has put in place. We have the Department of Energy leading the charge in many things related to the green transition and a circular economy and a net zero commitment for the future. But we also have the State Department and the Department of Defense. And the State Department, just about a year ago, created the Mineral Security Partnership, which is very active in promoting how collaboration works. And I know that I've heard folks from the State Department say, we're going to get it done, but we can get it done in a smarter way if we collaborate more with our allies and our partners. And there's a lot of them there. There's obviously a lot of rhetoric out there and narrative. I tend to stay on the positive side because, if anything, before coming to this role, I understand that you, instead of making up excuses, you got to roll up your sleeves, get to work, and do what's necessary. And I think that we all can contribute. So I do believe in collaboration is key. And last but not least, there's multiple phases of creating a strong battery industry in the US, one of which recycling is a big component of it. And I think that fostering and enabling those opportunities. Just recently online in Georgia, Augusta, Georgia, came online a big recycling facility. We do have Tennessee playing that. And the East Coast, for other reasons, Massachusetts have been gathering a lot of talent to that fact. So I am optimistic about where we are, and those components are the only thing that can maintain a global leadership and competitiveness for the US, but by all means, it's all about collaboration, and we strongly believe in that.
Amen to that. I think that's so true. And I also heard echoes of Barack Obama in what you just said about making sure that you're someone that gets stuff done. And I think we've all commented on that being an important part of what we do in an industry that's moving at a really rapid pace. I know time is short, and I'm sure the events organisers are looking at me to hurry up, but I just wondered whether anyone from the audience had a question, and if not, then I'll hand over to my colleagues to give us one last comment. Yes, sir. You might have to shout or stand at the front. Oh, you got a mic there.
Yeah, you spoke about the supply chain, and I think there was a representative here from the company where they identified in America 100% of the supply of graphite was coming from China a few years back, and they capitalized on that and they allowed that. So diversification on sources of where we get. So just kind of like a 2-point question. Why is there a lithium craze per se? Maybe there's an intelligent response to that when there are other minerals also involved in the battery production side. And the other question is about supply chain. When we talk about the sources from where, so like America was in this position where 100% of it was coming from China at one point, and then eventually, you know, this company capitalized on that and got in. So how important that is.
Who wants to take that? It's a two-parter. Greg?
I'll take the graphite side, and I can have a crack at the lithium one if no one else wants to. Look, I think, yeah, synthetic graphite currently is available from China, right? It is one of, the biggest bottlenecks or supply constraints in this whole industry is where you're going to get sufficiently pure and the performance of graphite you need to make anode for all of these vehicles. Currently it's coming out of China. Now there are sources of natural graphite around the world, many of them are now being explored. They themselves have their challenges in actually meeting the performance characteristics you need when it gets into anode. But when I look at where we are here, Saudi Arabia, one thing Saudi Arabia does produce a lot of, the last time I checked, was oil and gas, a lot of refineries, there's a lot of pet coke that comes out of them. Pet coke is what you need to make natural synthetic graphite, right? So I mean, if there was ever a part of the world, perhaps other than perhaps the States and maybe up in the UK, but that was positioned to be able to generate an alternative source of synthetic graphite, you'd have to think it was here. Anyone want to tackle lithium?
Yes, I mean, thank you for that question. taking the East African region, I mean, I really appreciated that China is one of the biggest producers of the graphite, but maybe this is going to change because taking Tanzania, Burundi, and DRC Congo, they are producing more than 45% of the graphite on our planet as we are talking now. So this 45%, I'm having, for example, in my country, Tanzania, a region, a province which is known as graphite. You know, so it's simply a graphite. So, I mean, even the name, so that, so, I mean, please, we need to, you know, so that is why we're here in Saudi Arabia to discuss with the investor that we need to diversify. So, of course, China, welcome, but Africa is coming. So 45% of the graphite on our planet, just from these three countries, Tanzania, Burundi, and DRC Congo. Please. So I think it will be great to.
Yeah, maybe
so China, we are coming.
Oh, wow. That's a competition.
Yeah, maybe I can take your question on lithium. Do you have a province called lithium as well?
Of course, 50% of the lithium on our planet, 70% of cobalt from these three regions, three countries, I mean, Burundi, Tanzania, and DRC Congo. 50% of the manganese from Tanzania, Burundi, and DRC. So, I mean, tell me, whatever we have, I mean, is all these critical mineral, only three countries, not to mention the rest. So, please, so we are...
I think the thing, though, about the lithium craze, right, when you compare it to, say, other commodities like nickel, for example, you know, nickel's used in so many other industries. So the additional demand we've seen for nickel and cathode, you know, it isn't much, it's off a large base. But the volatility in lithium is because, you know, lithium hasn't been demanded at such scale previously for other industries, right? Yeah. That would be my response.
I guess we're talking about resources. However, how to transfer the resources to the battery-grade materials in between, that's basically the bottleneck. That's what Elon Musk has been talking about. Refining is the bottleneck. That's the key thing you need to tackle. And I guess to help the public sector, maybe in the US, to understand this is critical because this is where you transfer everything from the minerals to the materials that can be made into the batteries. So the key part is the refining part. Unfortunately, for example, lithium hydroxide, back in 2022, total global production 180,000 tons, 90% produced from China, 2% from Australia by a Chinese company, unfortunately. So there's a historic reason. That's because no one else was doing that. So it was only the Chinese who's been doing that. And also, it's a legacy issue. However, that's being addressed. So you have the Aussie miners who wanted to go further downstream to build the lithium hydroxide, for example, in Kwinana, and also Minras is addressing that. Other companies, they're all working on that. But also, for example, in the US, Tesla, Elon Musk is building a refinery. He has recruited more than 10 Chinese engineers to come to the US to help them set up the refinery. So hopefully the supply chain can have a more, balanced and more reliable, which can address the geopolitical tensions and also help the supply chain to develop in a more healthy way.
And my only comment about that, in terms of policy, the U.S. created a federal consortium of advanced batteries, spearheaded by the Department of Energy, where they were looking into what were the bottlenecks and the important things to be addressed or goals. They created 5 strategic goals, but one of the key elements of that report is that they recognize, and I guess that COVID actually was an eye-opening moment for everything in the US, particularly on the supply chain side. So that vulnerability speeded most of what's happening today on that front. However, but to your point, you're absolutely right. When on that report is actually detailed how much the dependence was and how the US strategically started to incentivize certain areas. They're not going to get it just with the IRA. It's actually a component and working together with the states, with the local governments, so that they understand where a venture ground up goes like. I mean, there's detailed explanations also from the upstream all the way down mid and downstream as to how the U.S. government is trying to come up with programs to incentivize that. Now, the dependency and on lithium, I'm with you that it's not the only mineral that you can use to build a battery. I recently, actually yesterday, spoke with a group of people that are operating out of Boston because of the synergies with MIT to develop other technologies using other components, including graphite. So I'm, like I said at the beginning of my part, I'm very optimistic about how the future looks like.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to end on, and also the fact that one of the key takeaways for me from this discussion is collaboration being the key thing here to take away and to remember when we're talking about battery manufacturing. I'm afraid that's it. Time is over, but I want to thank my panel. I think you've been fantastic, really great insights, and a really good quick overview of the globe, essentially, of what's going on. Thank you to the audience for bearing with us. I know we've got what they call the graveyard shift, but you've done really well. And I look forward to seeing you all out there and connecting with you all. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.